Bonjour. Bonjour. Welcome, dear listeners, to another exciting episode of our podcast. We're thrilled to have you along for the ride, and we're powered by the wonderful folks at Jet Off. Who make all this magic happen.
And we're not just powered, we're turbocharged. We've got a fantastic show for you today, and we can't wait to dive in. So, let's get started.
Before we begin, I have to share a funny story with you all. So the other day, I was trying to cook a simple omelette, but let's just say it was a bit of a disaster. I added too much salt, and it was like eating a savory salt lick.
Oh man, that's rich. I'm sure your taste buds were doing the cha-cha slide. But seriously, Mira, how do you manage to mess up something as simple as an omelette?
Well, I guess you could say I was having a bit of a French moment. But, in all seriousness, it was a great opportunity for me to learn and improve my cooking skills.
Yeah. And I'm sure your kitchen was a bit more interesting after that experiment. So, moving on to more serious matters. Today we're going to be comparing two countries that are quite different from each other.
That's right. We're going to be talking about France and Micronesia. Two countries that are at opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to culture, lifestyle, and geography. And we're going to answer all the questions that are on your mind, whether you're considering moving to one of these countries or just want to know more about them.
That's right. We're going to be your comprehensive guide to both France and Micronesia. And we're not just talking about the obvious differences between the two countries, like the language, cuisine, and culture. We're going to dive deeper and explore the nuances of each country, so you can make an informed decision about which one is right for you.
And if you're considering living, moving, or marrying someone from one of these countries, we've got you covered. We'll be talking about everything from the cost of living to the job market, and even the romantic side of things.
Yeah, because let's be real. Folks, romance is a big part of any relationship. And we're not just talking about the romantic getaways to the Eiffel Tower or the beautiful beaches of Micronesia. We're talking about the everyday aspects of living in each country, like the food, the transportation, and the social norms.
So, if you're ready to embark on this exciting journey with us, then let's get started. We're going to be your guides, your confidants, and your friends as we explore the wonderful world of France and Micronesia.
And remember, folks, this podcast is brought to you by the wonderful team at JetOff, AI, who make all this magic happen. So let's give them a big thank you and get started.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We've got a lot more exciting content coming up, and we can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah, and if you're new here, welcome to the party. We're glad to have you along for the ride. And if you're a regular listener, then you know what to expect. We're going to be talking about France and Micronesia. And we're going to be doing it with our usual brand of humor and wit.
So, let's talk about general safety and crime rates in France and Micronesia. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that it's a top concern. France, with its rich history and vibrant cities, has a reputation for being a safe country. But, like any place, it's not immune to crime.
Yes. And Micronesia, with its beautiful islands and stunning beaches, has a much lower crime rate compared to France. In fact, according to the latest statistics, Micronesia has one of the lowest crime rates in the world.
Well, that's impressive. But, I'm curious. Leo, what's behind this low crime rate in Micronesia? Is it the small population, the lack of urbanization, or something else?
Well, Mira, I think it's a combination of all those factors. Micronesia's small population and lack of urbanization do contribute to the low crime rate. But I also think it's the strong sense of community and the emphasis on traditional values that play a big role.
That's really interesting. I've heard that Micronesia has a strong focus on community and family, and it's great to see how that translates into lower crime rates. But France, on the other hand, has a more complex situation. With its large cities and tourist areas, there are more opportunities for crime to occur.
Exactly. And France has a more developed police force and crime prevention strategies in place to deal with those issues. But, despite those efforts, there are still concerns about pickpocketing, theft, and other types of crime in tourist areas.
Ouch. Yes, pickpocketing can be a real problem in crowded areas like Paris. I've heard that even the Eiffel Tower is not immune to pickpocketing. But I'm curious, Leo, what can our listeners do to protect themselves from pickpocketing and other types of crime in France?
Great question. Nira, one thing our listeners can do is to be more aware of their surroundings and keep a close eye on their belongings, especially in crowded areas. And, of course, it's always a good idea to keep valuables secure and not leave them unattended.
That's so true. And I think it's also important to note that Micronesia, with its smaller population, more rural areas, has a different set of challenges when it comes to crime. For example, there's a higher risk of theft and vandalism in some areas, especially during festivals and celebrations.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that Micronesia has a more informal justice system, which can sometimes lead to delays and inefficiencies in dealing with crime.
That's an interesting point. Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they think that Micronesia's informal justice system is a strength or a weakness?
Great question. Mira, I think it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, Micronesia's informal justice system can be more flexible and adaptable to local needs. But on the other hand, it can also be more prone to corruption and inefficiency.
Wow, I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that France, with its more developed justice system, has a more formal and structured approach to dealing with crime.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why France has a lower crime rate compared to some other European countries. But, of course, there's always room for improvement. And France is continually working to update its justice system and make it more efficient.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a strong emphasis on community policing and crime prevention.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why both countries have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. Community policing and crime prevention are key to building trust and preventing crime.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that our listeners can play a big role in keeping their communities by reporting suspicious activity and supporting local law enforcement efforts.
Great point. Miro. And I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a strong focus on education and prevention when it comes to crime.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why both countries have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. Education and prevention are key to building a safer and more secure community.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to continue investing in education and prevention programs, especially in areas with high crime rates.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that our listeners can support these efforts by donating to local organizations that focus on education and prevention.
Great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a strong focus on tourism and hospitality, which can also play a role in keeping communities safe.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why both countries have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. Tourism and hospitality are key to building a safe and welcoming community.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to continue promoting tourism and hospitality efforts, especially in areas with high crime rates.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that our listeners can support these efforts by visiting these countries and experiencing their unique cultures and communities.
Great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a strong focus on cultural exchange and understanding, which can also play a role in keeping communities safe.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why both countries have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. Cultural exchange and understanding are key to building a safe and welcoming community.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to continue promoting cultural exchange and understanding efforts, especially in areas with high crime rates.
I see what you mean. And I think it's also worth noting that our listeners can support these efforts by participating in cultural exchange programs and events.
Great point. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a strong focus on environmental conservation and sustainability, which can also play a role in keeping communities safe.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why both countries have a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries. Environmental conservation and sustainability are key to building a safe and welcoming community.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to continue promoting environmental conservation and sustainability efforts, especially in areas with high crime rates.
Dive into the world of France and Micronesia, two countries that might seem worlds apart, but share some interesting similarities in their approach to political stability and social harmony. I'm curious, Leo, how do you think France's emphasis on social welfare and education contributes to its overall stability?
Great question. Mira, France has a reputation for being a socially progressive country, and its commitment to social welfare is indeed a key factor in maintaining stability. But let's not forget that Micronesia, on the other hand, has a more decentralized approach to governance, with a focus on local autonomy and community engagement. I think this approach has its own strengths, but it also raises questions about the distribution of power and resources.
That's a great point. Leo, in Micronesia, the emphasis on local autonomy and community engagement can lead to a sense of ownership and responsibility among citizens. But, as you said, it also means that the distribution of power and resources can be more complex. I'm curious, have you noticed any differences in the way that France and Micronesia approach conflict resolution?
Actually, I think both countries have a strong tradition of conflict resolution through dialogue and negotiation. In France, this is often facilitated through the use of mediation and arbitration, while in Micronesia, community-based mediation and reconciliation are more common. But what's interesting is that both countries also place a strong emphasis on preserving traditional practices and customs, which can help to build social harmony.
That's a great point. Leo, and speaking of traditional practices, I'm reminded of the importance of respect for cultural heritage in both France and Micronesia. I'm sure our listeners living in France would agree that the country's rich cultural heritage is a source of national pride. But I'm curious, Leo, how do you think Micronesia's unique cultural identity shapes its approach to social harmony?
Well, Micronesia's cultural identity is indeed unique, with a strong emphasis on traditional practices and customs. But, as you said, Mira, respect for cultural heritage is also deeply ingrained in French culture. In fact, France has a long history of protecting and promoting its cultural heritage, including its language, literature, and art. And, as we know, cultural heritage can be a powerful tool for building social harmony and promoting national identity.
That's so true, Leo. And speaking of social harmony, I'm reminded of the importance of community engagement and participation in both countries. In France, this is often facilitated through the use of participatory budgeting and community-led initiatives. While in Micronesia, community-based projects and initiatives are also common. I'm curious, Leo, how do you think these approaches to community engagement can help to build social harmony?
Well, I think both approaches are excellent examples of how community engagement can help to build social harmony, by giving citizens a sense of ownership and responsibility. These initiatives can help to foster a sense of community and shared purpose. And, as we know, community is at the heart of social harmony. But I'm also curious. Mira, how do you think France's emphasis on social welfare and education can help to promote social harmony?
Ah, great question. Leo, I think France's emphasis on social welfare and education is a key factor in promoting social harmony. By providing access to quality education and social services, France can help to reduce inequality and promote social cohesion. And, as we know, social cohesion is essential for building social harmony. But, I'm also curious. Leo, how do you think Micronesia's unique cultural identity shapes its approach to social harmony?
Well, Micronesia's cultural identity is indeed unique, with a strong emphasis on traditional practices and customs. But, as you said, Mira, respect for cultural heritage is also deeply ingrained in French culture. In fact, France has a long history of protecting and promoting its cultural heritage, including its language, literature, and art. And, as we know, cultural heritage can be a powerful tool for building social harmony and promoting national identity.
That's so true. Leo, and speaking of cultural heritage, I'm reminded of the importance of preserving traditional practices and customs in both countries. In France, this is often facilitated through the use of language and cultural programs, while in Micronesia, community-based initiatives and traditional practices are also common. I'm curious, Leo, how do you think these approaches to preserving cultural heritage can help to build social harmony?
Well, I think both approaches are excellent examples of how preserving cultural heritage can help to build social harmony. By preserving traditional practices and customs, both France and Micronesia can help to promote a sense of national identity and cultural heritage. And, as we know, cultural heritage can be a powerful tool for building social harmony and promoting national identity.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jet AI, where you can find in-depth analysis and expert insights on countries like France and Micronesia. And, as always, we'd love to hear from our listeners if you have any thoughts or comments on this topic. Please let us know in the comments section below. So, when it comes to economic conditions and cost of living in France, I think it's essential to talk about the job market. From what I've gathered, France has a strong economy with a diverse range of industries, including finance, fashion, and agriculture. This diversity creates a stable job market, with opportunities for expats to find employment in various sectors.
The City of Light, where the Eiffel Tower stands tall in the job market, is just as impressive. But let's get to the numbers, shall we? France has a relatively high cost of living, especially in cities like Paris and Lyon. However, the country's strong economy and stable job market make it an attractive destination for expats looking for a comfortable lifestyle.
Comfortable lifestyle? Indeed. I'm curious. Leo, have you had any personal experiences with job hunting in France? What were some of the challenges you faced? And how did you overcome them?
Yes. I recall my own struggles with finding a job in France. As a comedian, I had to adapt to the French sense of humor, which can be quite dry, shall we say. But seriously, I found that networking and building connections with locals was key to finding employment. And, of course, learning some basic French phrases didn't hurt either.
I can imagine. The French sense of humor can be quite interesting. But seriously, Leo, what about the cost of living in France? I've heard that it can be quite high, especially when it comes to housing and food.
Yes. The cost of living in France can be steep. Indeed. But, as I mentioned earlier, the country's strong economy and stable job market make it an attractive destination for expats. And, let's be real, the food in France is worth every euro.
I couldn't agree more. French cuisine is indeed some of the best in the world. But, I'm curious, have you ever tried to cook French food on a budget? I've heard that it can be quite challenging to find affordable ingredients.
Well, I've tried my hand at cooking French food, but let's just say it's not my forte. However, I've learned that shopping at local markets and using fresh ingredients can be a great way to save money while still enjoying delicious French cuisine.
That's a great tip, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that shopping at local markets is a great way to experience the local culture. But let's talk about Micronesia, our second country. What are some of the economic conditions and cost of living in Micronesia?
Micronesia, a country with a rich history and culture. When it comes to economic conditions, Micronesia has a relatively small economy with a focus on agriculture, fishing, and tourism. However, the cost of living in Micronesia is relatively low, making it an attractive destination for expats looking for a more affordable lifestyle.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to Micronesia? What was your experience like? And how did you find the cost of living?
Yes. I've been to Micronesia, and it's a beautiful country with a rich culture. As for the cost of living, I found it to be relatively low, especially when it comes to housing and food. However, the economy in Micronesia is still developing, and there may be some challenges when it comes to finding employment.
I see. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the job market in Micronesia. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Leo?
Well, the job market in Micronesia is still developing, but there are opportunities in various sectors, including tourism, fishing, and agriculture. However, it's essential to note that the job market in Micronesia is relatively small, and expats may need to be flexible and adaptable to find employment.
I see. Well, thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights on Micronesia. And to our listeners, I'm sure you're wondering how to compare the two countries. Let's talk about some of the key differences between France and Micronesia when it comes to economic conditions and cost of living.
Yes. Let's get to the numbers, shall we? France has a relatively high cost of living, especially in cities like Paris and Douai. Micronesia, on the other hand, has a relatively low cost of living, making it an attractive destination for expats looking for a more affordable lifestyle.
And let's not forget about the job market. Leo, France has a strong economy and a diverse range of industries, while Micronesia has a smaller economy with a focus on agriculture, fishing, and tourism.
Yes. And let's not forget about the cultural differences between the two countries. France is known for its rich history and culture, while Micronesia has a rich cultural heritage, with a focus on traditional practices and customs.
I'm curious. Leo, how do you think expats can navigate the cultural differences between France and Micronesia? What advice would you give to our listeners who are considering moving to either country?
Well, I think it's essential to be flexible and adaptable when moving to a new country. Learn about the local culture, customs, and traditions, and be open to new experiences and challenges. And, of course, learn some basic French and Micronesian phrases to help you navigate everyday life.
I couldn't agree more. Leo? And to our listeners, I'm sure you're wondering what the next steps are. Let's talk about some of the practical considerations for expats moving to either country.
Yes. Let's get to the practical considerations, shall we? When moving to France, it's essential to research the cost of living, job market, and cultural differences. When moving to Micronesia, it's essential to research the cost of living, job market, and cultural differences, as well as the visa requirements and residency process.
I see. And to our listeners, I'm sure you're wondering what the final verdict is. Let's summarize the key points about France and Micronesia when it comes to economic conditions and cost of living.
Yes. Let's summarize the key points, shall we? France has a strong economy and a diverse range of industries, with a relatively high cost of living. Micronesia has a smaller economy with a focus on agriculture, fishing, and tourism, with a relatively low cost of living.
Dive into accommodation options and quality in France and Micronesia. I'm curious. Leo, how do you think these two countries compare in terms of housing?
Well, Mira, France is known for its beautiful chateau and historic buildings, but also for its high cost of living, especially in cities like Paris. On the other hand, Micronesia is a tropical paradise with stunning beaches and coral reefs, but its housing market is relatively underdeveloped.
That's a great point. I think one of the main differences is the affordability of housing. In France, you can expect to pay a premium for a cozy apartment in a city center, while in Micronesia, you might be able to find a more affordable option, but with limited amenities.
Exactly. And in Micronesia, the housing market is largely driven by the tourism industry, so you'll find a lot of resorts and hotels catering to visitors. But for expats and locals, the options are more limited.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever stayed in a resort in Micronesia? What was your experience like?
Yes. I have stayed in a resort in Micronesia, and it was amazing. The staff were friendly, and the food was delicious. But what struck me was the lack of amenities and services available to guests. It was like being on a private island, but with limited options for entertainment and shopping.
That's a great point. Leo, and I think that's something that expats in Micronesia might need to consider when looking for accommodation. On the other hand, in France, you have a wide range of options, from luxury apartments to affordable student housing.
Yes, and in France, you also have a well-developed public transportation system, making it easy to get around without a car. In Micronesia, on the other hand, you'll need a car to get around, especially if you're living in a rural area.
That's a good point, Leo. And I think that's something that expats in Micronesia might need to consider when choosing accommodation. But, Leo, I have to ask, have you ever experienced any cultural differences when staying in a resort in Micronesia?
Yes. I have experienced some cultural differences, and it was actually really fascinating. For example, in Micronesia, the concept of time is very different from what we're used to in the West. They have a more relaxed attitude towards time, and it was actually really refreshing.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think that's something that expats in Micronesia might need to get used to when living in the country. But, Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in Micronesia, what are your experiences with accommodation and cultural differences?
Great question. Mira, I'm sure our listeners have some valuable insights to share. And, Mira, I have to ask, what do you think is the most challenging aspect of finding accommodation in France?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the most challenging aspects of finding accommodation in France is the language barrier. Not everyone speaks English, and it can be difficult to navigate the housing market without speaking French.
Exactly. And I think that's something that expats and locals in France might need to consider when looking for accommodation. But, Mira, I have to say, I'm impressed by your French language skills. You're almost fluent, aren't you?
Thank you. I try my best, but I'm still working on improving my language skills. And, Leo, I'm curious, have you ever lived in a small town in France? What was your experience like?
Yes. I have lived in a small town in France, and it was amazing. The people were friendly, and the food was delicious. But what struck me was the lack of amenities and services available in the town. It was like being in a time capsule.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think that's something that expats and locals in small towns in France might need to consider when choosing accommodation. But, Leo, I have to ask, what do you think is the most important factor to consider when choosing accommodation in France?
That's a great question. Mira, I think the most important factor to consider is the location. You want to be in a place that's convenient for work, shopping, and entertainment.
That's a great point. And I think that's something that expats and locals in France might need to consider when choosing accommodation. And, Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in France, what are your experiences with accommodation and location?
Great question. Mira, I'm sure our listeners have some valuable insights to share. And, Mira, I have to ask, what do you think is the most exciting aspect of exploring accommodation options in France and Micronesia?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the most exciting aspects is the opportunity to experience different cultures and ways of life. Whether it's the historic buildings of France or the tropical landscapes of Micronesia, there's always something new to discover.
Exactly. And I think that's something that expats and locals in both countries can appreciate. Well, Mira, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your insights. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Leo. And I hope our listeners have found this conversation informative and entertaining. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments section. And, Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences in France and Micronesia. Okay, let's dive into the world of visa, immigration, and official procedures in France and Micronesia. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that navigating bureaucracy can be a real challenge.
Absolutely. Mira, I've had my fair share of dealing with official paperwork, and I can attest that it's not always a walk in the park. But let's start with France, shall we?
France, the land of love, cheese, and bureaucracy. In all seriousness, France has a reputation for being quite strict when it comes to immigration policies. But I've heard that they also have a relatively straightforward process for obtaining a visa.
That's true. Mira, France has a points-based system for work visas, which makes it easier for qualified individuals to obtain a visa. However, the process can be lengthy, and the requirements can be quite specific.
I see. So it's not just about filling out a form and waiting for approval, right? It's more like a game of immigration roulette, where you have to carefully navigate the system to increase your chances of success.
Well, maybe not exactly, but it can feel that way at times. But, in all seriousness, France does offer a relatively streamlined process for obtaining a visa, especially for work-related purposes.
That's good to know. And what about Micronesia? How does their immigration process compare to France's?
Micronesia is a bit of a different story. As a small island nation, they have a relatively simple immigration process, but it can be quite challenging to obtain a visa, especially for work-related purposes.
I can imagine. I've heard that Micronesia has a unique approach to immigration, where they prioritize family ties and community connections over formal paperwork.
That's correct. Mira, Micronesia has a strong emphasis on family and community, and their immigration process reflects that. However, it can be difficult for outsiders to navigate this process, especially if they don't have a strong connection to the community.
I see. It's almost like they have a who-you-know approach to immigration, rather than a formal, bureaucratic process.
Well, maybe not exactly, but it can feel that way at times. However, Micronesia's approach to immigration is unique and reflects their cultural values.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever had to deal with the immigration process in Micronesia?
Actually, I have. Mira, and let me tell you, it was quite an adventure. But I managed to navigate the system and obtain a visa, with the help of some very kind locals.
Well, I'm glad you made it through the process. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the immigration process in Micronesia.
Absolutely. Mira, and I'm happy to share more information about Micronesia's immigration process. But before I do, I have to ask, have you ever had to deal with the immigration process in France? Mira?
Yes. Leo, I have. Actually. And let me tell you, it was a bit of a challenge, but I managed to navigate the system and obtain a visa.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Mira, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the immigration process in France.
So, let's continue our conversation about the immigration process in France and Micronesia. I'm sure our listeners will find it informative and helpful.
Absolutely. Mira, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. But before we do, I have to ask, what do you think our listeners would say about the immigration process in France and Micronesia? Do they have any tips or advice for navigating the system?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would have some valuable insights to share. And who knows, maybe we'll even get some comments from our listeners who have dealt with the immigration process in France and Micronesia.
Well, let's hope so. Mira. And who knows? Maybe we'll even get some advice from our listeners on how to navigate the system.
So, let's dive into the healthcare system in France, shall we? I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the French are known for their love of fine cuisine and wine. But did you know that they also have a highly developed healthcare system?
Ah, oui. France is indeed renowned for its excellent healthcare services. And I think it's no secret that the French take great pride in their socialized healthcare system, known as Secured Social. But, as experts, we know that navigating the system can be a bit of a challenge, especially for those who don't speak French fluently.
That's absolutely true, Leo. But, in all seriousness, France's healthcare system is considered one of the best in the world, with universal coverage, comprehensive services, and a strong focus on preventative care. And, as an added bonus, the French healthcare system is also known for its charming and often free, or low-cost hospital stays.
Ah, yes. The famous French hospital stays. I've heard stories about the luxurious accommodations and gourmet meals. But, of course, we all know that's not the reality for most patients. In reality, the system can be a bit bureaucratic, and waiting times can be long, especially for non-emergency procedures.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the French healthcare system is not without its flaws. That overall, it's a highly regarded system that prioritizes patient care and well-being. And, as experts, we can appreciate the convenience of having access to quality healthcare services, even if we don't always speak the language fluently.
That's true, Mira. But let's contrast that with the healthcare system in Micronesia, where, as we all know, the healthcare landscape is vastly different. I'm curious to know, Mira, what do you think our listeners would say about the healthcare system in Micronesia?
Well, Leo, I think it's safe to say that the healthcare system in Micronesia is still developing and faces many challenges, particularly in terms of access to quality healthcare services, especially in rural areas. But what I find fascinating is that the Micronesian healthcare system is slowly adapting to the changing needs of its population, with a growing focus on community-based healthcare initiatives.
Ah, yes. That's a great point, Mira. And, as we all know, community-based healthcare initiatives are essential for addressing the unique healthcare needs of rural and isolated communities. But what about the quality of care? Mira, do you think our listeners would agree that the quality of care in Micronesia is exquisite?
Leo, you're such a jokester. But while the quality of care in Micronesia may not be as high as in France, I think it's essential to acknowledge the efforts being made to improve healthcare services in the country. And, as experts, we can appreciate the resilience and resourcefulness of the Micronesian people in the face of significant healthcare challenges.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that, as expats, we have a unique perspective on the healthcare systems in both France and Micronesia. We've seen firsthand the strengths and weaknesses of each system. And we can appreciate the complexities of healthcare delivery in each country.
Absolutely. Leo, and I think it's essential to recognize that healthcare is not just about access to quality services. It's also about the cultural nuances and patient experiences that shape the healthcare landscape in each country. And, as experts, we can appreciate the unique cultural contexts in which healthcare services are delivered.
Well, Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights we've shared about the healthcare systems in France and Micronesia. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a healthcare system that combines the best of both worlds, the efficiency of France's secured social with the community-based initiatives of Micronesia.
Oh, Leo, you're such a dreamer. But, in all seriousness, I think it's essential to acknowledge the complexities of healthcare delivery in each country and to appreciate the efforts being made to improve healthcare services. And, as experts, we can play a vital role in promoting cultural understanding and exchange between our home countries and the countries we live in.
Ah, Mira, you're such a diplomat. And I think it's worth noting that, as expats, we have a unique opportunity to share our experiences and insights with others, and to promote greater understanding and cultural exchange between our home countries and the countries we live in.
Absolutely. And I think it's essential to recognize that, as expats, we are part of a global community that is connected by our shared experiences and our desire to learn from each other. And as we navigate the complexities of healthcare delivery in each country, we can appreciate the unique cultural contexts in which healthcare services are delivered.
Well, Mira, I think we've reached the end of our conversation about access to and quality of health services in France and Micronesia. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights we've shared. But before we go, I have to ask, Mira, what do you think our listeners would say about the healthcare system in Micronesia?
Oh, Leo, you're such a tease. But I think our listeners would have a lot to say about the healthcare system in Micronesia. And I'm sure they would appreciate the insights we've shared about the complexities of healthcare delivery in the country.
Ah, Mira, you're such a diplomat. And I think it's worth noting that, as expats, we have a unique opportunity to share our experiences and insights with others, and to promote greater understanding and cultural exchange between our home countries and the countries we live in.
Absolutely. And I think it's essential to recognize that, as expats, we are part of a global community that is connected by our shared experiences and our desire to learn from each other. And as we navigate the complexities of healthcare delivery in each country, we can appreciate the unique cultural contexts in which healthcare services are delivered.
Well, Mira, I think we've reached the end of our conversation about access to and quality of health services in France and Micronesia. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insights we've shared.
Ah, Leo, you're such a jokester. But I think our listeners will appreciate the insights we've shared about the healthcare systems in. All right, let's dive into transportation infrastructure and convenience in France and Micronesia. Who would have thought that these two countries, so different in size and population, would have their own unique transport challenges? I bet our listeners in France are nodding along with me on this one.
That's right, Mira, and I'm to share some surprising facts about Micronesia's transportation landscape. But first, let's talk about France. I mean, have you seen the Paris Metro? It's like a beautifully designed maze, but with fewer exits.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But seriously, France does have an impressive public transportation system. I've heard that the TC, DV, or Train à Grande Vitesse, is one of the fastest trains in the world. Well, that's like racing through the French countryside.
Yeah, it's like a high-speed roller coaster, but with more wine and cheese. But in all seriousness, France's public transportation network is quite extensive, with buses, trams, and metro lines connecting major cities and towns. And let's not forget about the famous French bike share systems.
Oh, I love bike share systems. They're so convenient and eco-friendly. But have you heard about the challenges Micronesia faces when it comes to transportation? I mean, it's a vast island nation with limited roads and infrastructure.
Ah, yes. Micronesia's transportation landscape is indeed unique, with a population of less than 100 people spread across 4 main islands. It's a logistical nightmare to get around. But what's fascinating is that Micronesia has developed a robust maritime transportation system, with frequent ferry services connecting the islands.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea Micronesia had such a well-developed ferry system. But what about road conditions? I've heard that Micronesia's roads can be quite rough, especially during the rainy season.
Yeah, it's like driving on a roller coaster. But seriously, Micronesia's road conditions can be challenging, especially for tourists who are not used to driving on rough terrain. However, the government is working to improve the road network, with new projects aimed at upgrading the island's infrastructure.
I'm glad to hear that. Leo, and I have to say, France's transportation system is definitely more developed. But Micronesia's unique challenges make it an interesting case study. What do you think? Listeners, have you traveled to Micronesia or France? What were your experiences with transportation?
Ah, great question. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners have some amazing stories to share. If you've got a better transit hack or a funny transportation experience, drop a comment below. And don't forget to share your thoughts on France and Micronesia's transportation systems.
Okay, Leo, you're such a tease. But seriously, transportation infrastructure and convenience are crucial for tourists and locals alike. And it's fascinating to see how different countries, like France and Micronesia, approach this challenge.
That's right, Mira, and I think we've only scratched the surface of this topic. But for now, let's wrap up our discussion on transportation infrastructure and convenience in France and Micronesia. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more travel tips and stories. Au revoir. And we'll catch you on the flip side. I'm sure our listeners are curious about language barriers in France. After all, it's one of the most romantic languages in the world. Who wouldn't want to learn it? But let's be real, it's not always easy. I've tried to learn French, but I'm still stuck on bonjour and merci. Leo, how about you? Have you ever tried to navigate the French language?
Yes, I've had my fair share of linguistic mishaps in France. But you know what they say, elle appetit bien ten mangint. Or in my case, elle arrive en ten parlant. But seriously, French is a beautiful language, and I've always been fascinated by its complexities. Did you know that French has a lot of loanwords from other languages, like English, Spanish, and Arabic?
Wow, I didn't know that. But it makes sense, considering France's rich history and cultural exchange. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the language and culture of France. Leo, can you tell us about your experience with French language and culture?
Ah, bien sir. As a comedian, I've had the opportunity to perform in France. And let me tell you, it's a challenge. But I've also had some amazing experiences learning about the culture and history of France. For example, have you ever heard of the French concept of joie de vivre? It's the joy of living, and it's something that the French take very seriously.
That's so true. And it's something that our listeners can definitely relate to. But let's talk about Micronesia, the second country we're comparing. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever heard of Micronesia?
Ah, yes. Micronesia is a fascinating country, located in the Pacific Ocean. And did you know that it's made up of 4 main island groups? Yeah. Coast Ray and Ponte? Each island has its own unique culture and language.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the languages of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us about the languages spoken in Micronesia?
Ah, yes. Micronesia has a rich linguistic diversity, with for official languages English, Chuuk, Coast Rayan, and Yapesi. And did you know that each island has its own unique language and dialect? It's a fascinating example of linguistic diversity.
That's so cool. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about how language barriers affect communication in Micronesia. Leo, have you ever experienced any language barriers in Micronesia?
Ah, yes. As a matter of fact, I had a funny experience trying to communicate with a local in Micronesia. I was trying to order a meal, but I couldn't understand the menu. So I just pointed to what I wanted, and the local laughed and said, you're speaking Micronesian. It was a funny moment, but it also made me realize how important it is to learn the local language.
That's so true. And it's something that our listeners can definitely relate to. But let's talk about how language barriers can be overcome in both France and Micronesia. Leo, what do you think is the key to overcoming language barriers?
I think the key is to be open-minded and willing to learn. Whether it's learning a few phrases in French or trying to communicate in Micronesian, it's all about being willing to make an effort. And, of course, having a sense of humor doesn't hurt either.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with that. But let's talk about the benefits of learning a new language. Leo, what do you think are the benefits of learning a new language?
I think the benefits are numerous. Not only can it open up new cultural and social opportunities, but it can also improve your cognitive skills and boost your confidence. And let's not forget the joy of being able to communicate with locals in their own language.
That's so true. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the benefits of learning a new language. Leo, can you tell us about your experience with learning a new language?
Yes. As a comedian, I've had the opportunity to learn a few languages, including French and Spanish. And let me tell you, it's been a challenge, but also incredibly rewarding. I've even performed in a few languages, including French and Spanish.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the challenges and rewards of learning a new language. Leo, what advice would you give to our listeners who are interested in learning a new language?
I would say, vive la différence. Or in other words, embrace the difference. Learning a new language is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to learn about a new culture and way of life. And don't be afraid to make mistakes, it's all part of the learning process.
Thank you, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with that. But let's talk about how language barriers can be overcome in both France and Micronesia. Leo, what do you think is the key to overcoming language barriers?
I think the key is to be open-minded and willing to learn. Whether it's learning a few phrases in French or trying to communicate in Micronesia, it's all about being willing to make an effort. And of course, having a sense of humor doesn't hurt either.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with that. Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights and experiences with us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about language barriers and ease of communication in France and Micronesia. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more fun and informative content.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to a place where you felt like you didn't fit in, but you still managed to find your place somehow?
Actually, I was in a small town in France once, and I was the only one wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. I felt like I stuck out like a thumb. I stuck out like a sore thumb. But the locals were so friendly and welcoming that I ended up having a great time.
I love that story. So, let's talk about France and its cultural diversity. I've heard that France has a rich history of accepting and celebrating different cultures.
That's true. France has a strong tradition of being a melting pot of cultures. You'll find people from all over the world living and working in Paris, and the city has a vibrant international community.
I've heard that France has a lot of social harmony initiatives in place to promote cultural diversity and tolerance. Can you tell me more about those?
Yes. France has a number of programs and initiatives aimed at promoting social cohesion and combating discrimination. For example, the French government has implemented programs to help integrate immigrants into French society and provide them with access to education and job training.
That's great to hear. And what about Micronesia? I've heard that it's a very diverse country with a mix of different cultures and languages.
Yes, Micronesia is a fascinating place. The country has a rich cultural heritage, with a mix of traditional and modern cultures. You'll find people from different islands and languages, And the country has a strong tradition of storytelling and oral history.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you've lived in either of these countries, what do you think about cultural diversity and tolerance?
Well, I think our listeners will agree that both France and Micronesia have a lot to offer in terms of cultural diversity and tolerance. But what's interesting is that they approach it in different ways. France has a more formalized approach, with government programs and initiatives, while Micronesia has a more informal approach, with a strong emphasis on community and storytelling.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think that's what makes both countries so unique. France has a rich history and a strong sense of tradition, while Micronesia has a more relaxed and laid-back approach to life.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes both countries so appealing to visitors and expats. You'll find that people in both countries are warm and welcoming, and they're eager to share their culture and traditions with others.
I love that. And speaking of traditions, I've heard that France has a lot of cultural festivals and celebrations throughout the year. Can you tell me more about those?
Yes. France is famous for its festivals and celebrations. You'll find everything from the Bastille Day celebrations to the Cannes Film Festival. And in Micronesia, you'll find festivals like the Micronesian Cultural Festival, which celebrates the country's rich cultural heritage.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the cultural diversity and tolerance in both countries. What do you think is the key to creating a harmonious and inclusive society?
I think the key is to respect and appreciate the differences between cultures and communities. When we celebrate our differences and learn from each other, we create a more harmonious and inclusive society.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's what makes both France and Micronesia so special. They're both countries that celebrate their diversity and promote social harmony.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes them so appealing to visitors and expats. You'll find that people in both countries are warm and welcoming, and they're eager to share their culture and traditions with others.
I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thanks for joining me, Leo. And I hope our listeners enjoyed this conversation about cultural diversity and tolerance in France and Micronesia.
Thanks. Mira, it was a pleasure chatting with you. And I hope our listeners learned something new and interesting about these two amazing countries.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried to learn a new language? I mean, not just pick up a few phrases, but actually immerse yourself in it.
Oh, all the time. I've been trying to learn French for years, but I'm not sure if I'm getting it right. I keep I say bonjour instead of bonsoir.
That's hilarious. I'm sure the French would appreciate your enthusiasm. But seriously, France is known for its excellent education system, especially when it comes to language learning.
Yes. The French are very proud of their language and culture. And it's not just the language, either. France has a rich history of art, literature, and philosophy that's deeply rooted in its education system.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to the capital city, Paris. Even smaller towns in France have a strong focus on education and language learning.
I've heard that the French are very particular about their language, even among themselves. But that's what makes it so interesting, right? The nuances and complexities of the language.
Yes, and I'm sure our listeners who have tried to learn French would agree with me. But let's talk about Micronesia, our second country. What do you know about their education system?
Well, Micronesia is a bit of a unique case. It's a small island nation with a small population, but they have a strong focus on education, especially when it comes to preserving their culture and language.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Micronesia has a rich cultural heritage, with many different languages and dialects spoken across the islands.
Yes, and the education system is designed to preserve and promote those languages and cultures. It's a very community-based approach to learning.
I can imagine. And I'm sure our listeners who have visited Micronesia would agree with me. But let's talk about language learning in general. What do you think is the key to successful language learning?
That's a tough one. But I think it's all about immersion, don't you? Surrounding yourself with the language and culture, and not being afraid to make mistakes.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the language itself, but also about the culture and customs surrounding it.
Yeah, and I'm sure our listeners who have tried to learn French would agree with me.
Oh, yeah. But seriously, France has a number of language schools and programs that cater to international students.
Ah, yes. The French language schools are highly regarded, especially in cities like Paris and Lyon.
And what about Micronesia? Do they have any language schools or programs for international students?
Well, Micronesia has a few language schools, but they're mostly focused on preserving the local languages and dialects.
Ah, I see. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in learning more about the cultural and historical context of Micronesia's education system.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would also be interested in hearing about the unique challenges of language learning in a small island nation like Micronesia.
Yes, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that language learning is a lifelong process, and it requires patience, dedication, and practice.
Yeah. And I'm sure our listeners would also agree with me that making mistakes is an essential part of the language learning process.
Oh, Leo. But seriously, France and Micronesia offer unique opportunities for language learners, and we hope our listeners will find this information helpful in their own language learning journeys.
Absolutely. And we're happy to have had this conversation with our listeners today.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss in future episodes.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more language learning tips and resources.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination.
I'm curious. Leo, how does France's climate compare to Micronesia's?
Well, Mira, France is known for its temperate climate, with warm summers and mild winters, whereas Micronesia has a tropical climate with high temperatures and high humidity year-round.
That's a huge difference. I can see why Micronesia would be so humid. But I'm not sure I'd want to trade my occasional rain showers in Paris for a tropical paradise.
I don't blame you. Mira, I think the charm of Paris lies in its unpredictable weather. But, in all seriousness, Micronesia's climate is quite unique.
I've heard that Micronesia is prone to typhoons and storms. How does the local culture adapt to these extreme weather events?
Ah, yes. The Micronesian people are known for their resilience in the face of natural disasters. They have a strong tradition of building sturdy homes and communities that can withstand the harsh weather conditions.
That's impressive. I'm sure our listeners living in Micronesia would agree with me that building strong homes is essential.
I'm sure they would. Mira, but in France, we have a more, let's say, relaxed approach to building codes.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But, seriously, how do the French adapt to their climate?
Well, Mira, the French are known for their love of fashion, and their wardrobe choices often reflect the changing seasons. In the summer, they'll often wear light, breathable clothing, and in the winter, they'll bundle up in warm coats and scarves.
That's so true. I've seen the French stylishly dressed for every occasion. But, I'm curious. How do they deal with the occasional heat wave that hits Paris?
Ah, yes. The heat waves in Paris can be quite intense. But the French have a clever solution. They'll often seek refuge in the city's many parks and gardens, where they can enjoy the shade and cool breezes.
That's a great idea. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the parks and gardens in Paris.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in Micronesia, the locals have a different approach to dealing with the heat. They'll often take a dip in the ocean or a nearby lake to cool off.
Ah, that sounds refreshing. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they prefer the French approach to cooling off or the Micronesian approach?
Well, Vera, I think it's safe to say that our listeners would love to have access to both options. But, in all seriousness, the climate in Micronesia can be quite challenging, especially during the typhoon season.
That's right, Leo. And speaking of typhoons, I've heard that Micronesia has a unique tradition of preparing for these storms. Can you tell us more about that?
Ah, yes. The Micronesian people have a rich tradition of preparing for typhoons. They'll often hold community meetings and share information about the approaching storm. And they'll also make sure to secure their homes and belongings.
That's so impressive. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the community-based approach to disaster preparedness in Micronesia.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in France, we have a more, let's say, bureaucratic approach to disaster preparedness.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But how do the French prepare for natural disasters like floods and heat waves?
Well, Mira, the French have a well-organized system in place for responding to natural disasters. They'll often set up emergency shelters and provide assistance to those affected by the disaster.
That's so reassuring to know. I'm sure our listeners would feel more at ease knowing that the French have a plan in place for emergency situations.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in Micronesia, the locals have a more, let's say, hands-on approach to disaster preparedness.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But how do the Micronesian people prepare for disasters like typhoons and earthquakes?
Well, Mira, the Micronesian people have a strong tradition of building resilient communities that can withstand natural disasters. They'll often work together to prepare for and respond to disasters, and they'll also make sure to have emergency supplies on hand.
That's so impressive. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the community-based approach to disaster preparedness in Micronesia.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in France, we have a more, let's say, formal approach to disaster preparedness.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But how do the French prepare for natural disasters like floods and heat waves?
Well, Mira, the French have a well-organized system in place for responding to natural disasters. They'll often set up emergency shelters and provide assistance to those affected by the disaster.
That's so reassuring to know. I'm sure our listeners would feel more at ease knowing that the French have a plan in place for emergency situations.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in Micronesia, the locals have a more, let's say, flexible approach to disaster preparedness.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But how do the Micronesian people prepare for disasters like typhoons and earthquakes?
Well, Mira, the Micronesian people have a strong tradition of building resilient communities that can withstand natural disasters. They'll often work together to prepare for and respond to disasters, and they'll also make sure to have emergency supplies on hand.
That's so impressive. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the community-based approach to disaster preparedness in Micronesia.
I'm sure they would, Mira. But in France, we have a more, let's say, predictable approach to disaster preparedness.
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But seriously, how do the French prepare for natural disasters like floods and heat? I'm telling you, Leo, the French have mastered the art of food, from escargot to croissants. Their culinary heritage is unmatched. And let's not forget about the chorizo, the glorious cheese.
Ah, but Mira, you're forgetting about the land of 1,000 Micronesia. Their food culture may not be as well known, but trust me, it's a hidden gem. They have a unique blend of traditional and modern cuisine, with influences from their Micronesian, Japanese, and American roots.
I'm intrigued. Leo, tell me more about Micronesian cuisine. What are some of the staple dishes?
Well, Mira, one of the most popular dishes is sashimi-grade tuna, which is often served with a side of coconut milk and vegetables. And let's not forget about the traditional Micronesian dish, taro, which is a staple in many households.
Taro, you say? I've had taro before, but I've never tried it with coconut milk. That sounds delicious. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the nutritional benefits of taro.
Yes, taro is not only delicious, but it's also packed with nutrients. It's a good source of fiber, vitamins, and minerals, making it an excellent addition to a healthy diet.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any favorite Micronesian dishes or cooking methods? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they'll have plenty to say. But let's get back to the topic at hand: food culture and nutritional alternatives. In France, they have a strong emphasis on fresh, locally sourced ingredients, which is reflected in their cuisine.
Exactly. And that's what makes French cuisine so unique. But, Leo, I have to ask, what about the food culture in Micronesia? Is it similar to French cuisine? Or is it more focused on traditional dishes?
It's a bit of both. Mira, while Micronesia has its own unique cuisine, they also have a strong emphasis on fresh seafood and locally sourced ingredients. And let's not forget about the importance of community. In Micronesian cuisine, meals are often shared with family and friends.
I love that. Community is such an important aspect of food culture, and it's something that we should all strive for. And speaking of community, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the food culture in their own countries. So, let's open it up to them. What are some of your favorite traditional dishes or cooking methods?
I'm sure we'll get plenty of responses. But, Mira, I have to ask, what about the health benefits of French cuisine? Are there any specific dishes or ingredients that are particularly good for you?
Yes. French cuisine is known for its emphasis on healthy ingredients, such as olive oil, garlic, and fresh herbs. And let's not forget about the importance of portion control. The French are masters of eating in moderation.
I see what you mean. And that's something that we can all learn from eating in moderation and focusing on fresh, locally sourced ingredients.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me. So, let's get back to the topic at hand: food culture and nutritional alternatives. In Micronesia, they have a unique approach to food that is both traditional and modern.
Yes. And that's something that we should all strive for: a balance between tradition and innovation. And let's not forget about the importance of trying new things. After all, as the French say, variety is the spice of life.
I love that. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me. So, let's wrap up this topic by asking, what are some of your favorite food-related tips or tricks? Let us know in the comments.
I'm sure we'll get plenty of responses. And that's all for this topic. Folks, thanks for joining us on this culinary journey through France and Micronesia. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting topics and conversations.
So, France, with its rich history, stunning architecture, and world-class art museums, is a treasure trove of cultural and artistic values. I mean, who can resist the charm of the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre's Mona Lisa?
But let's not forget the lesser-known gems, like the medieval town of Carcassonne or the stunning beaches of the French Riviera. And have you ever tried French pâtisserie? It's a culinary experience like no other.
Indeed. The French are known for their love of food and wine, and their cuisine is a reflection of their rich cultural heritage. Cheers. AI loves uncovering stories like this. And so do we. Did you know that the French have a special fondness for cheese, with over 400 varieties to choose from?
And let's not forget the famous French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, "Man is condemned to be free." I think that's a pretty profound statement about the human condition, don't you?
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the French emphasis on individual freedom and creativity. But let's move on to our second country, Micronesia, which has its own unique cultural and artistic values. From the ancient island of Yak to the modern-day capital of Palikir, Micronesia has a rich history and a deep connection to the ocean. Oh!
That's right. And Micronesia is home to some of the most beautiful coral reefs in the world, with an incredible array of marine life. And have you ever heard of the traditional Micronesian dance, the sauce-LP? It's a beautiful and intricate dance that tells the story of the island's history and culture. Well,
I'd love to learn more about that dance. Leo, can you tell us more about it?
Well, the sauce-LP is a traditional dance that is performed during special occasions like weddings and festivals. It's a way of telling stories and passing down history and culture from one generation to the next. And it's not just about the dance itself, but also about the costumes and the music that accompany it.
That sounds amazing. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it too. So, if you're interested in learning more about the SOCLP or Micronesian culture in general, be sure to check out Jet AI for more resources and information.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes peeks at our research and travels. We love sharing our experiences and learning from our listeners, and we're always eager to hear your thoughts and ideas.
That's right. Leo, and speaking of thoughts and ideas, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the cultural and artistic values of France and Micronesia. Do you think there are any similarities or differences between the two countries?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences is the level of exposure to Western culture. France, of course, has a long history of cultural exchange with Europe, while Micronesia has been influenced by American and Asian cultures. But despite these differences, both countries have a deep appreciation for their own unique cultural heritage.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on preserving their cultural traditions and passing them down to future generations. Jet AI loves highlighting stories like this, and we're always on the lookout for more.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes both France and Micronesia so special. They're not just countries with rich histories and cultures, but also places where you can experience the warmth and hospitality of the people.
That's so true, Leo. And I think that's something that our listeners can really relate to, especially if they've had the chance to visit either country. So, let's hear from you. Have you ever visited France or Micronesia? What were your impressions of the culture and art scene?
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. But we'll be back with more insights and stories from around the world. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more updates and behind-the-scenes peeks at our research and travels.
So, Leo, have you ever been to France? I mean, who hasn't, right? But seriously, their natural beauty is just stunning. From the snow-capped Alps to the sun-kissed Riviera, it's a paradise for nature lovers.
Yes. France is indeed a beautiful country. But let's talk about Micronesia, shall we? I mean, have you seen the crystal clear waters and coral reefs of the Pacific? It's like a postcard come to life.
Oh, Micronesia is definitely on my bucket list. I've heard the islands are so untouched and pristine. But France has some amazing national parks too, like the Vinoise National Park in the Alps. Have you been there, Leo?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it's breathtaking. But I think Micronesia's unique landscape is its lagoon system. The way the seawater flows through the islands, creating these beautiful, shallow waters. It's just incredible.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's geography. Leo, can you tell us a bit more about the island chain?
Sure thing. Micronesia is made up of over 600 islands, but only a few are inhabited. And each island has its own unique ecosystem, from the coral reefs to the mangrove forests. It's a nature lover's paradise.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these beautiful islands. Leo, do you have any recommendations for must-see destinations in Micronesia?
Yes. The island of Chuuk is definitely a highlight. The crystal clear waters and coral reefs are simply stunning, and the local people are so friendly and welcoming.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cultural heritage of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us a bit about the traditional way of life on the islands?
Well, the Micronesian people have a rich cultural heritage, with a strong emphasis on community and tradition. They're skilled fishermen and farmers, and their traditional way of life is still thriving today.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the unique wildlife of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us about some of the rare species found on the islands?
Ah, yes. Micronesia is home to many rare and endemic species, including the Micronesian megapode, a unique bird that's found only on a few islands in the Pacific.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these incredible birds. Leo, can you recommend any good wildlife watching spots in Micronesia?
Ah, yes. The island of Kosrae is a great spot for bird watching, with many rare species found only on the island.
That sounds fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique geological features of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us about some of the island's volcanic landscapes?
Ah, yes. Micronesia is home to many volcanic islands, including the island of Pohnpei, which has a unique limestone island and a stunning volcanic crater lake.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these breathtaking landscapes. Leo, can you recommend any good hiking spots in Micronesia?
Ah, yes. The island of Yap is a great spot for hiking, with many trails that take you through the island's lush forests and volcanic landscapes.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique natural features of France. Leo, can you tell us about some of the country's most stunning landscapes?
Ah, yes. France has some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world, including the stunning fjords of the Cale and Cues di Piana in Corsica.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these breathtaking fjords. Leo, can you recommend any good hiking spots in France?
Ah, yes. The GR20 Trail in Corsica is a must-do for any hiker, with stunning views of the island's rugged coastline and mountain peaks.
That sounds fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique wildlife of France. Leo, can you tell us about some of the country's most iconic animals?
Ah, yes. France is home to many iconic animals, including the majestic European ground bear and the playful otter.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these incredible animals. Leo, can you recommend any good wildlife watching spots in France?
Ah, yes. The Camargue region in southern France is a great spot for bird watching, with many rare species found only in the region.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique cultural heritage of France. Leo, can you tell us about some of the country's most famous festivals?
Ah, yes. France is famous for its festivals, including the Cannes Film Festival and the Paris Fashion Week.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique natural wonders of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us about some of the island's most breathtaking landscapes?
Ah, yes. Micronesia is home to many breathtaking landscapes, including the stunning island of Ulithi, which is surrounded by a coral reef.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these stunning islands. Leo, can you recommend any good snorkeling spots in Micronesia?
Ah, yes. The island of Chuuk is a great spot for snorkeling, with many coral reefs and fish species found only in the island.
That sounds wonderful. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique cultural heritage of Micronesia. Leo, can you tell us about some of the island's most famous traditional dances?
Ah, yes. Micronesia has many traditional dances, including the bird dance, which is a traditional dance that is still performed today.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique natural features of France. Leo, can you tell us about some of the country's most stunning mountain ranges?
Ah, yes. France has many stunning mountain ranges, including the Pyrenees and the Alps.
Well, that sounds incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see some pictures of these breathtaking mountain ranges. Leo, can you recommend any good hiking spots in the Pyrenees?
Ah, yes. The GR10 Rail in the Pyrenees is a must-do for any hiker, with stunning views.
So, France, the land of love, cheese, and adventure sports. Who wouldn't want to try their hand at skiing down the Alps or hiking through the picturesque countryside? I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me that France is a paradise for outdoor enthusiasts.
But Micronesia, a tiny island nation in the Pacific, offers a completely different kind of adventure. With its crystal clear waters, coral reefs, and lush forests, it's a haven for scuba divers, snorkelers, and marine enthusiasts. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the idea of diving with sharks in Micronesia. Would you dare to do it?
I think I would. But first, let's talk about France's national sports scene. The French are famous for their love of cycling, and the Tour de France is one of the most iconic sporting events in the world. Have you ever tried cycling in the French countryside? Leah? I bet it's breathtaking.
Yes, I have. And it's not just the scenery that's beautiful, the food is incredible too. I mean, who can resist a good baguette and cheese? But I have to say, Micronesia's water sports are on a whole different level. The island of Yap is famous for its traditional stone money. But did you know that it's also a hotspot for surfing and kayaking?
Wow, that sounds amazing. And speaking of amazing, have you heard about France's famous surf spots? Have you ever surfed in Hoscoa? Leo? It's one of the most popular surf spots in Europe. And for good reason, the waves are epic.
I wish I could surf, but I'm more of a get wet and fall off kind of guy. But seriously, Nero, France's surf culture is not to be missed. And Micronesia? Well, it's more about the snorkeling and diving, but the coral reefs are some of the most beautiful in the world. Did you know that the island of Kosrae has some of the most pristine coral reefs in Micronesia?
That's incredible. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's unique wildlife. Have you heard about the Micronesian megapode? It's a bird that's endemic to the islands, and it's known for its unique nesting habits.
Yes. The megapode is a fascinating bird, but let's talk about something a bit more adventurous. Have you heard about the infamous frogman of Micronesia? It's a legend about a man who survived a shark attack and went on to become a local hero.
Whoa, that's a crazy story. But I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about France's own legends and myths. Have you heard about the story of the Maid of Orleans? Joan of Arc? It's a famous tale of bravery and patriotism.
Yes. Joan of Arc is an iconic figure in French history. But let's get back to the present day. What do you think about the idea of trying rock climbing in Micronesia? The island of Chuuk has some of the most challenging rock climbing routes in the Pacific.
Oh, I'm intrigued. And speaking of challenging, have you heard about France's famous ski resorts? Have you ever skied in the French Alps? Leo? It's a thrill unlike any other.
Yes. The Alps are a skier's paradise. But let's not forget about Micronesia's own ski resorts, or rather, lack thereof. But what the islands do have is a vibrant cultural scene, with traditional dances, music, and art.
That's so cool. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's unique cultural heritage. Have you heard about the traditional Micronesian dance of the Palawan? It's a beautiful and intricate dance that's been passed down through generations.
Yes, the Palawan is a stunning dance. But let's talk about something a bit more fun. Have you heard about the famous French Quarter of New Orleans? It's a vibrant neighborhood that's known for its jazz music, delicious Creole cuisine, and lively atmosphere.
Wow, that sounds amazing. But let's get back to Micronesia. What do you think about the idea of trying volcano boarding in Micronesia? The island of Pohnpei has an active volcano that's just begging to be explored.
Yes. Volcano boarding is definitely not for the faint of heart. But I have to say, Mira, that France has its own unique adventure sports scene, like paragliding in the French Alps. It's a thrilling way to see the beautiful mountains and valleys of the Alps.
That sounds exhilarating. And speaking of exhilarating, have you heard about Micronesia's famous long-distance running tradition? Have you ever heard about the Micronesian Marathon that takes place every year?
Ah, yes. The Micronesian Marathon is a grueling but rewarding experience for runners. But let's not forget about France's own running traditions like the famous Paris Marathon that takes place every year.
Yes. The Paris Marathon is a world-famous event. But I have to say, Leo, that Micronesia has its own unique running traditions, like the traditional Micronesian foot race that takes place in the villages.
Ah, yes. The traditional Micronesian foot race is a thrilling experience for runners and spectators alike. But let's talk about something a bit more. Relaxing. Have you heard about the famous French Riviera? It's a stunning coastline that's known for its beautiful beaches, crystal clear waters, and picturesque villages.
Boom! That sounds amazing. And speaking of amazing, have you heard about Micronesia's own stunning coastlines? Like, have you ever seen the island of Yap's famous stone money beaches?
Ah, yes. The stone money beaches of Yap are a unique and fascinating sight. But let's not forget about France's own unique cultural heritage like the famous French cabaret tradition.
Yes. The French cabaret is a world-famous institution. But I have to say, Leo, that Micronesia has its own unique cultural traditions, like the traditional Micronesian dance that's been passed down through generations.
Ah, yes. The traditional Micronesian dance is a beautiful and intricate art form. But let's talk about something a bit more adventurous. Have you heard about the famous Micronesian sailing tradition? It's a thrilling way to explore the islands and enjoy the ocean.
Whoa, that sounds amazing. And speaking of amazing, have you heard about France's own sailing traditions? So, let's dive into the nightlife scene in France and Micronesia. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a French nightclub?
Actually, I have. The music, the lights, the crowd, it's an experience like no other. But I have to say, the French can be quite particular about their nightlife. You'll find a lot of upscale clubs and bars in Paris, especially in the Champs-Élysées area.
That's true. But I think the French nightlife scene is more about enjoying good company and good food, rather than just dancing the night away. And, of course, there's the famous cabaret scene in Paris, like the Moulin Rouge.
Ah, yes. The Moulin Rouge is a must-see. I agree. But have you ever been to a Micronesian island? I've been to some of the islands in the Federated States of Micronesia, and the nightlife is, well, quite different.
I'm sure it is. So, tell me, what's the nightlife like in Micronesia?
Well, it's kind of like a thing. It's more laid back. To say the least. You'll find small bars and clubs on the islands, but they're mostly geared towards locals. And, of course, there's the famous Micronesian Festival, the Yap Traditional Dance Festival, which is a must-see if you're interested in traditional Micronesian culture.
That sounds fascinating. I'd love to experience it one day. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it too. So, let's talk more about the festival. What can our listeners expect to see and experience?
Ah, the festival is a real treat. You'll see traditional Micronesian dances, music, and even some modern performances. And, of course, there's the food. You'll find a variety of traditional Micronesian dishes, like coconut crab and tow.
That sounds delicious. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about the music scene in Micronesia. What kind of music can they expect here?
Well, Micronesian music is a unique blend of traditional and modern styles. You'll hear a lot of traditional island music, but also some modern influences, like American and Australian music.
That's interesting. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the festivals and events in Micronesia. Are there any other festivals or events that we should know about?
Ah, yes. There's the Chuuk State Festival, which is a great opportunity to experience Micronesian culture and traditions. And, of course, there's the annual Micronesian Independence Day celebration, which is a big deal in the islands.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the festivals and events in France. Are there any other festivals or events that we should know about?
Ah, yes. There's the famous Cannes Film Festival, which is one of the biggest film festivals in the world. And, of course, there's the Paris Fashion Week, which is a must-see for fashion enthusiasts.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the nightlife scene in France. Are there any other tips or recommendations for our listeners?
Ah, yes. If you're looking for a unique nightlife experience in France, I recommend checking out the bars and clubs in the Marais neighborhood in Paris. And, there's the famous cabaret scene in Paris, like the Moulin Rouge.
That's a great tip, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the nightlife scene in Micronesia. Are there any other tips or recommendations for our listeners?
Ah, yes. If you're looking for a unique nightlife experience in Micronesia, I recommend checking out the small bars and clubs on the islands. And, of course, there's the famous Micronesian festival, the Yap Traditional Dance Festival.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot about the nightlife and entertainment scenes in France and Micronesia.
Thank you. Mira, it was a pleasure discussing this topic with you. And to our listeners, I'm sure they'll agree that both France and Micronesia have unique and exciting nightlife scenes.
And don't forget to check out our next topic, where we'll be discussing the food scene in these two countries. It's going to be a delicious conversation.
I'm sure it will be. And to our listeners, don't forget to leave your comments and suggestions in the comments section below. We love hearing from you.
I'm set to dive into family-friendly environments and children's activities in France and Micronesia. Both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to keeping kids entertained and engaged.
Ah, yes. France is like a giant playground for kids, with its beautiful parks, gardens, and museums. The Eiffel Tower alone is a thrill for kids of all ages.
That's true. But what about Micronesia? I've heard it's a paradise for families, with its crystal clear waters and stunning beaches.
Well, Micronesia might not have the grandeur of the Eiffel Tower, but it has its own unique charm. The island of Yap, for example, has a beautiful lagoon that's perfect for swimming and snorkeling.
I can imagine. And what about the culture? I've heard that Micronesia has a rich cultural heritage that's perfect for kids to learn about.
Absolutely. Micronesia has a rich history and culture that's steeped in tradition. The island of Kosrae, for example, has a beautiful ancient temple that's a must-see for kids.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And what about France? I've heard that it has a lot of family-friendly activities, especially in Paris.
Yes. Paris is a city that's perfect for kids. The Louvre Museum, for example, has a whole wing dedicated to children's art and culture.
That's so cool. And what about the food? I've heard that French cuisine is perfect for kids, with its delicious pastries and bread.
Oh, you're speaking my language now. French cuisine is indeed a treat for kids, with its delicious bread, cheese, and pastries.
I'm glad you agree. Leo, and what about Micronesia? I've heard that it has a lot of fresh seafood that's perfect for kids to try.
Ah, yes. Micronesia is a seafood lover's paradise. The island of Pohnpei, for example, has a beautiful beachside restaurant that serves the freshest seafood you'll ever taste.
That sounds delicious. And what about the safety of these countries? I've heard that France is generally a safe country for families.
Ah, yes. France is a very safe country for families. The island of Corsica, for example, is a popular destination for families, with its beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters.
I'm glad to hear that. Leo, and what about Micronesia? I've heard that it's also a safe country for families.
Ah, yes. Micronesia is generally a very safe country for families. The island of Chuuk, for example, has a beautiful lagoon that's perfect for swimming and snorkeling.
I can imagine. And what about the cost of living in these countries? I've heard that France can be quite expensive.
Yes. France can be quite expensive, especially in Paris. But Micronesia, on the other hand, is a relatively affordable country to live in.
That's good to know. Leo, and what about the education system in these countries? I've heard that France is a very highly regarded education system.
Yes. France has a very highly regarded education system. The country has a strong emphasis on education, and its schools are among the best in the world.
Wow, that's impressive. And what about Micronesia? I've heard that it also has a good education system.
Yes. Micronesia has a good education system, with a focus on traditional Micronesian culture and values.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. And what about the healthcare system in these countries? I've heard that France has a very good healthcare system.
Yes. France has a very good healthcare system, with a strong emphasis on preventive care and modern medical facilities.
That's reassuring to know. Leo, and what about Micronesia? I've heard that it also has a good healthcare system.
Yes. Micronesia has a good healthcare system, with a focus on traditional healing methods and modern medical facilities.
I'm glad to hear that. Leo, and what about the family-friendly activities in these countries? I've heard that France has a lot of fun activities for kids.
Yes. France has a lot of fun activities for kids, especially in Paris. The city has a whole range of museums, parks, and gardens that are perfect for families.
That's so cool. And what about Micronesia? I heard that it also has a lot of fun activities for kids.
Yes. Micronesia has a lot of fun activities for kids, especially in the island of Yap. The island has a beautiful lagoon that's perfect for swimming and snorkeling.
I can imagine. And what about the cultural events in these countries? I've heard that France has a lot of cultural events and festivals.
Yes. France has a lot of cultural events and festivals, especially in Paris. The city has a whole range of museums, galleries, and cultural institutions that are perfect for families.
That's so cool. And what about Micronesia? I've heard that it also has a lot of cultural events and festivals.
Yes. Micronesia has a lot of cultural events and festivals, especially in the island of Kosra. The island has a beautiful ancient temple that's a must-see for kids.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And what about the language? I've heard that France has a lot of English speakers.
Yes. France has a lot of English speakers, especially in Paris. The city is a hub of international business and tourism. So many people speak English.
That's good to know. Leo? And what about Micronesia? I've heard that it has a lot of English speakers as well.
Yes. Micronesia has a lot of English speakers, especially in the island of Chuuk. The island has a strong focus on education and English language skills.
I'm glad to hear that. Leo? And what about the transportation in these countries? I heard that France has a good public transportation system.
Yes. France has a good public transportation system, especially in Paris. The city has a comprehensive network of buses, trains, and metro lines that make it easy to get around.
That's so convenient. And what about Micronesia? I've heard that it also has a good public transportation system.
Yes. Micronesia has a good public transportation system, especially in the island of Yap. The island has a beautiful lagoon that's perfect for swimming and snorkeling.
I can imagine. And what about the cost of traveling in these countries? I've heard that France can be quite expensive. I'm sure our listeners would agree that France is a beacon of inclusivity, especially when it comes to the LGBT community. From the iconic Pride Parade in Paris to the vibrant gay bars in Montmartre, France has a long history of embracing diversity.
But let's not forget about the not-so-glamorous side of things. I mean, have you seen the bureaucratic process of getting married in France? It's like trying to navigate a French bureaucracy-themed obstacle course. But seriously, France has made significant strides in recognizing same-sex marriage and adoption rights.
Exactly. And it's not just about the laws. It's also about the cultural attitudes. I've noticed that even in smaller towns, there's a sense of acceptance and openness towards the LGBT community. It's not uncommon to see couples holding hands or kissing in public, and people seem to be more comfortable expressing themselves.
That's true, but I think we should also acknowledge the challenges that still exist. For example, the French government has been criticized for its handling of hate crimes against LGBT individuals. It's not enough to just have laws in place. We need to see real action and commitment to protecting the community.
Absolutely. And I think that's where France's colonial past comes into play. The country has a complex history with its former colonies, and that's had a lasting impact on the way it views diversity and inclusivity. But despite these challenges, France has made significant progress in recent years, and it's an inspiring example for other countries to follow.
Speaking of inspiring examples, let's talk about Micronesia. I'm curious to know more about the LGBT community there. What do you know about it?
Well, Micronesia is a fascinating case study. On the one hand, the country has a relatively conservative culture, and there's still a lot of stigma surrounding LGBT individuals. But, on the other hand, there's a growing movement towards inclusivity and acceptance, particularly among the younger generation.
That's interesting. I've heard that Micronesia has a strong tradition of cultural tolerance, despite its conservative reputation. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, that's right. Micronesia has a rich cultural heritage, and there's a strong emphasis on community and respect for all individuals. While the country may not have the same level of formal recognition for LGBT rights as France does, there's a growing sense of acceptance and understanding among the population.
I see. And what about the government's stance on LGBT issues? Is there any indication that they're moving towards greater inclusivity?
Well, the Micronesian government has taken steps to promote human rights and dignity for all citizens, including LGBT individuals. However, it's still a work in progress, and there's a lot of room for improvement.
I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this. Do you think Micronesia is doing enough to promote LGBT inclusivity? Or is there still a long way to go?
I think it's a complex issue, and there's no easy answer. But what I do know is that Micronesia has the potential to be a leader in promoting cultural tolerance and acceptance. With the right support and advocacy, I believe the country can make significant strides in recognizing and protecting the rights of LGBT individuals.
That's a great point. And finally, I think it's worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a lot to learn from each other. France can learn from Micronesia's strong cultural traditions and sense of community, while Micronesia can learn from France's commitment to formal recognition and protection of LGBT rights.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of comparing these two countries. We can see that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to promoting LGBT inclusivity, but rather a nuanced understanding of the complex cultural and historical contexts that shape each country's journey.
Well, there you have it, folks. France and Micronesia may seem like vastly different countries, but when it comes to LGBT inclusivity, they share a common goal to create a more accepting and welcoming society for all. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see a pride parade in Micronesia that's just as vibrant and joyful as the one in Paris.
So, when it comes to hospitality, I think France is known for being quite welcoming, especially when it comes to their famous joie de vivre. They just love to live life to the fullest and share that with others. I'm sure many of our listeners who have visited France can attest to that.
Yeah. The French are known for being a bit particular, but once you win them over, they'll treat you like family. I remember visiting a small village in Provence and being invited to a local's home for a meal. It was like being part of the family for the day.
That's so true. And I think that's what makes France so charming. The locals are so passionate about their culture and traditions, and they're always eager to share that with visitors. I've had some of my best experiences in France, like trying to navigate the Paris metro with a map, only to be helped by a friendly local who showed me the way.
Yeah. The Paris metro can be a challenge, but the French are always up for a good laugh. I once tried to order a coffee in a cafe and ended up with a funny conversation with the barista about the meaning of life. It was definitely a memorable experience.
That sounds like a typical French experience. Then I think what's really impressive about France is how they managed to balance their rich cultural heritage with a modern, cosmopolitan vibe. You can find everything from traditional bistros to trendy cafes and boutiques.
Absolutely. And that's what makes France so attractive to expats and visitors alike. The French have a way of making you feel like you're part of the community, even if you're just visiting. I'm sure our listeners who have lived in France can attest to that.
Speaking of expats, I've heard that Micronesia has a very different approach to hospitality. Instead of a formal, welcoming culture, they have a more relaxed and informal approach to hosting visitors.
That's right. Micronesia is all about community and family. When you visit a local island, you're essentially part of the family for the duration of your stay. They'll invite you to join in on their daily activities, like fishing or gardening, and share their meals with you.
I've also heard that Micronesia has a very unique concept of kinship where visitors are considered part of the community and are treated as family members.
That's right. And it's not just a concept, it's a way of life. When you visit Micronesia, you'll be treated like a member of the family, and you'll be expected to participate in community activities and share in their traditions.
I think that's what makes Micronesia so special, the way they've managed to preserve their traditional way of life while still being open to outsiders. It's a true cultural gem.
Absolutely. And it's a great example of how different cultures can come together and learn from each other. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about Micronesia's unique approach to hospitality.
So, let's talk about what our listeners can expect when visiting Micronesia. What are some of the key things to keep in mind when it comes to hospitality and cultural norms?
Well, for one thing, be prepared to be treated like family. The Micronesia NS will invite you to join in on their daily activities and share their meals with you. And don't be if you're asked to participate in traditional dances or ceremonies.
That's right. And it's all part of the Micronesian way of life. They value community and family above all else. And they'll go out of their way to make you feel welcome.
And don't forget to try some of the local cuisine, it's delicious. The Micronesia NS are famous for their seafood. And you'll find plenty of fresh fish and other seafood delicacies on the menu.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's unique cuisine. Can you tell us a bit more about the local specialties?
Sure thing. One of the most popular dishes in Micronesia is a traditional fish called kinai. It's made with fresh fish, vegetables, and spices, and it's absolutely delicious.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that Micronesia has a very unique approach to food sharing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. In Micronesia, food sharing is a big part of the culture. When you're invited to a meal, you'll be expected to share food with the rest of the group, and it's considered rude to refuse.
That's so true. And it's not just about the food, it's about the community and the sharing of stories and experiences. In Micronesia, food is a way of bringing people together and building relationships.
Absolutely. And it's a big part of the Micronesian way of life. When you visit Micronesia, be prepared to be treated like family. And don't be if you're asked to share a meal or participate in a traditional dance.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's unique approach to hospitality. Can you tell us a bit more about the local customs and traditions?
Sure thing. In Micronesia, there are many unique customs and traditions that are worth exploring. For example, the Micronesia NS have a traditional dance called the Kaestan, which is a beautiful display of traditional dance and music.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that Micronesia has a very unique approach to storytelling. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. In Micronesia, storytelling is a big part of the culture. The Micronesia NS have a rich tradition of oral storytelling, and they'll often share stories and legends around the campfire or at community gatherings.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about Micronesia's unique approach to storytelling. Can you tell us a bit more about the local legends and myths?
Sure thing. In Micronesia, there are many local legends and myths that are worth exploring. For example, the Micronesia S have a story about a mythical creature called the Nga Rachimauq, which is a beautiful and powerful being that is said to have the power to heal and protect.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that Micronesia has a very unique approach to art and craftsmanship. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. In Micronesia, art and craftsmanship are a big part of the culture. The Micronesians are skilled craftsmen and artists, and they'll often create beautiful pieces of art using traditional materials like wood, stone, and shell.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesia's unique approach to art and craftsmanship. Can you tell us a bit more about? I'm curious. Leo, how does France's internet infrastructure compare to Micronesia's? I mean, can you imagine being in a country with a population of just over 110, and having a relatively modern digital landscape?
That's a great point. Vera, France, on the other hand, is a tech-savvy nation with a well-established internet infrastructure. I'd say it's like night and day between the two countries. France has a highly developed digital ecosystem with fast and reliable internet connections, while Micronesia is still catching up.
That's fascinating. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the differences between the two countries. So, Leo, what are some of the key differences in internet infrastructure between France and Micronesia?
Well, for starters, France has a very high-speed internet network, with average speeds of around 20 Mbps. In contrast, Micronesia's internet speeds are much slower, with an average speed of around 1 Mbps. That's a significant difference, especially when you consider the cost of internet in Micronesia, which can be quite expensive.
Oh, I can see why that would be a challenge for digital nomads or remote workers in Micronesia. But what about the mobile network coverage? Does France have better mobile network coverage than Micronesia?
Oh, yes. France has an excellent mobile network coverage, with all major carriers offering 4G and 5G services in most areas. In Micronesia, mobile network coverage is still limited, with only a few carriers offering 3G services in some areas.
Wow, that's a big difference. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital landscape in Micronesia. So Leo, what's the current state of the internet in Micronesia? And how is it impacting the local community?
Well, Mira, Micronesia's internet infrastructure is still developing, but it's making progress. The government has invested in improving internet connectivity, particularly in the capital city of Palantir. However, the internet is still largely unreliable, and many residents rely on mobile networks for internet access.
I see. And what about the cost of internet in Micronesia? Is it expensive for locals to access the internet?
Yes. The cost of internet in Micronesia can be quite high, especially for those who don't have access to fiber optic connections. However, the government has introduced initiatives to make internet more affordable for low-income households.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the initiatives in place to improve internet access in Micronesia. So, Leon, can you tell us more about the government's plans to improve internet infrastructure in the country?
Yes. The government has introduced several initiatives to improve internet infrastructure, including the deployment of fiber optic cables and the development of a national broadband plan. However, the progress has been slow, and many residents still lack access to reliable internet.
I see. And what about the digital literacy in Micronesia? Is it a challenge for locals to access and use the internet?
Yes. Digital literacy is a challenge in Micronesia, particularly among older residents who may not have the skills or resources to access and use the internet. However, the government has introduced initiatives to promote digital literacy and provide training programs for locals.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the initiatives in place to promote digital literacy in Micronesia. So, Leon, can you tell us more about the training programs available to locals?
Yes. The government has introduced several training programs to promote digital literacy, including online courses and workshops. However, the programs are still limited, and many residents lack access to these resources.
I see. And finally, what about the future of internet infrastructure in Micronesia? Is it likely to improve in the coming years?
Yes. The future of internet infrastructure in Micronesia is looking promising. The government is committed to investing in improving internet connectivity, and several private companies are also working on deploying fiber optic cables and improving mobile network coverage.
That's great to hear. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the future of internet infrastructure in Micronesia. So, Leo, can you tell us more about the plans in place to improve internet connectivity in the country?
Oh, yes. The government has introduced several plans to improve internet connectivity, including the development of a national broadband plan and the deployment of fiber optic cables. However, the progress will depend on the availability of funding and the ability to overcome technical challenges.
I see. And what about our listeners in Micronesia? If you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you'd love to know more about the current state of the internet in your country. So, please feel free to share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments.
Yes. And to our listeners in France, I'm curious to know more about your experiences with internet infrastructure in your country. Do you have any favorite apps or services that you use to stay connected online?
I'm sure our listeners in France would love to share their favorite apps and services with us. And to our listeners in Micronesia, I'd love to hear more about your experiences with internet access in your country. So, let's talk about shopping in France. You can't walk a block without stumbling upon a charming boutique or a bustling market. And the best part? The prices aren't as steep as you'd think, especially if you know where to look.
But that's where the magic happens. N'est-ce pas? France is like a treasure trove of retail therapy. From high-end designer boutiques to quaint little shops selling handmade crafts. There's something for every budget.
Exactly. And the value for money is incredible. I mean, have you tried a freshly baked croissant from a local pâtissier? It's like a taste explosion in your mouth. And it costs next to nothing.
You're making me hungry. Mira, but seriously, the French know how to balance quality and price. It's all about finding the right spot, whether it's a street market or a high-end department store.
And don't even get me started on the shopping centers. Galeries Lafayette, Les Bon Marché, and Printemps are just a few of the iconic department stores that offer an unparalleled shopping experience.
I'm sure our listeners are already planning their next shopping spree in Paris. But let's not forget about Micronesia, our second country in this comparison. What's the shopping scene like there?
Micronesia, a tropical paradise with a more laid-back approach to shopping. You won't find any high-end boutiques or sprawling malls here. But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I'm curious. Mira, what kind of shopping opportunities can you find in Micronesia?
Well, for one, the local markets are a great place to find unique handicrafts and souvenirs. And the best part? The prices are incredibly reasonable, especially considering the quality of the items.
That sounds like a great way to support local artisans and get a taste of the local culture. But what about the big-ticket items? Can you find anything luxurious in Micronesia?
Luxurious? Well, I wouldn't say that's exactly the vibe in Micronesia. But you can find some nice resorts and hotels that offer high-end amenities, like spas and fine dining restaurants.
So the luxury experience is more like a tropical getaway rather than a full-on shopping spree?
Exactly. But hey, sometimes it's nice to trade in the hustle and bustle of city life for a more relaxed atmosphere.
I see what you mean. And I'm sure our listeners are already weighing the pros and cons of shopping in France versus Micronesia. But let's get back to the topic at hand, price-performance balance.
Yes. So, in France, you get a great balance of quality and price. You can find something for every budget, from affordable street food to high-end designer goods.
That's true. But what about Micronesia? Can you find anything that's comparable in terms of quality and price?
Well, while the quality might not be the same as in France, the prices are certainly more reasonable. And sometimes, that's all you need, a good value for your money.
I think that's a fair point. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners are already about their next shopping adventure. So, what do you say we wrap up this topic and move on to the next one?
Sounds good to me. Leo. And remember, folks, if you have any thoughts on shopping in France versus Micronesia, be sure to let us know in the comments below.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more travel tips and shopping advice.
Until next time, when we'll be exploring more of the amazing shopping opportunities around the world. Au revoir for now.
And don't forget to pack your shopping bags for Micronesia.
Let's talk about cultural events, festivals, and concert opportunities in France and Micronesia. France, being a country with a rich history and art scene, has numerous festivals throughout the year. From the Cannes Film Festival to the Montreux Festival, there's always something going on.
France, the land of love, art, and, of course, festivals. But let's not forget about Micronesia, a country with its own unique blend of traditional and modern cultural events. I'm sure our listeners living in Micronesia would agree that the Island Hopping Festival is a must-attend event.
Island Hopping Festival? That sounds like a blast. I'd love to learn more about it. For more, check out Jitoff for some amazing insights on Micronesian culture.
Well, it seems like our listeners are curious about Micronesia's cultural events. But let's get back to France. Have you ever been to the French Riviera during the summer? The festivals there are absolutely stunning, with fireworks, music, and delicious food.
Oh, yes. I've been to the French Riviera, and it's indeed breathtaking. But I'm curious, Leo, have you ever been to a traditional Micronesian festival? I imagine it would be a unique experience.
Actually, I've been to a Micronesian festival, and it was incredible. The music, the dancing, the food, it was all so vibrant and colorful. And, of course, the hospitality of the Micronesian people is legendary.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Micronesian festivals. For those interested, Jitoff has some fantastic resources on traditional Micronesian culture.
Exactly. And speaking of resources, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some insights on France's cultural events. After all, France is famous for its festivals, and we shouldn't forget about that.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that we're highlighting both countries' cultural events. It's essential to appreciate and learn about different cultures. Don't you think? I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me.
Of course, Mira. And I think it's great that we're exploring the unique aspects of each country's culture. For instance, Micronesia's Island Hopping Festival is a great example of how the country's geography and culture come together.
That's a fantastic point, Leo. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on preserving their cultural heritage. In France, for example, there are numerous efforts to protect and to promote traditional music and dance.
Yes. And in Micronesia, the government is actively working to preserve the country's traditional arts and crafts. It's heartening to see both countries taking steps to protect their cultural heritage.
It's indeed heartening to see. And I think it's essential to recognize the importance of cultural events and festivals in bringing people together. Whether it's in France or Micronesia, these events have the power to unite people and create a sense of community.
Well said, Mira. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of community and social responsibility. In Micronesia, for example, the community comes together to support each other during difficult times.
That's a wonderful aspect of Micronesian culture. And I think it's essential to learn more about these cultural events and festivals. For those interested, I recommend checking out Jitoff for some fantastic resources on cultural trends.
Exactly. And I think it's great that we're highlighting the unique aspects of each country's culture. Whether it's the French Riviera's festivals or Micronesia's Island Hopping Festivals, there's something for everyone to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a rich cultural calendar, with numerous events and festivals throughout the year. From the Cannes Film Festival to the Island Hopping Festival, there's always something going on.
Well said, Mira. And I think it's essential to appreciate and learn about different cultures. After all, cultural events and festivals have the power to bring people together and create a sense of community.
Indeed they do. And I think it's great that we're highlighting both countries' cultural events. It's essential to recognize the importance of cultural preservation and community building.
Agreed. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong emphasis on preserving their cultural heritage. It's heartening to see both countries taking steps to protect their cultural heritage.
Well, that's all for now. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about cultural events and festivals in France and Micronesia. So, check out Jetoff for some amazing insights on cultural trends.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and learn more about your cultural events and festivals. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
So, we're comparing the opportunities and ease of learning the local language into countries, and I'm to dive into France and Micronesia. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried to learn a new language? And if so, what was your experience like?
Mira, I've had my fair share of trying to learn new languages. But let's just say, I'm not the most diligent student. I once tried to learn some basic phrases in French, but I think I ended up confusing the locals more than helping them. I remember saying bon appetit when I meant to say bonjour. The look on their faces was priceless.
Oh, that's hilarious. I can imagine. I've had my share of language learning mishaps too. But I've always found that immersing myself in the culture and trying to speak with locals helps a lot. In France, for example, there are many language schools and cultural centers that offer language classes and cultural immersion programs.
That's true. Mira, France is known for its rich cultural heritage and language schools. But what about Micronesia? How does it compare in terms of language education?
Well, Micronesia has a unique approach to language education. Since it's a Pacific island nation, the language is primarily Micronesian, but many people also speak English as a second language. However, I've heard that the local language is quite challenging to learn, especially for foreigners.
I can imagine. I've always been fascinated by the Pacific Island cultures, and I think it would be amazing to learn the local languages. But what about language schools in Micronesia? Are they as developed as they are in France?
Actually, Leo, Micronesia has a relatively small number of language schools, and many of them are focused on teaching English as a second language. There are some cultural centers and language exchange programs that offer language classes and cultural immersion experiences.
That's interesting. I think it's great that Micronesia is focusing on teaching English as a second language, given its location and the number of tourists who visit the islands. But what about the local language? Is it worth learning, or is it mostly used by the indigenous population?
That's a great question. Leo, the local language is indeed worth learning, as it's a unique and beautiful language that reflects the culture and history of the Micronesian people. I think it's also important to note that many Micronesians are bilingual or multilingual. So it's not uncommon to hear people speaking both Micronesian and English.
I see what you mean. It's like in France, where many people speak both French and English. But what about the challenges of learning the local language in Micronesia? I've heard that the grammar and vocabulary can be quite complex.
Yes, that's true. The local language in Micronesia has a complex grammar system and vocabulary that can be challenging for foreigners to learn. I think it's also worth noting that many Micronesians are eager to share their language and culture with visitors. So it's not uncommon to find language exchange programs and cultural immersion experiences.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you're living in Micronesia or France, or if you've tried to learn one of these languages, we'd love to hear your experiences and tips in the comments below.
And if you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments too. But I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia offer unique opportunities for language learners. And it's worth exploring these opportunities to learn more about the local culture and language.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's also worth noting that learning a new language is not just about mastering the grammar and vocabulary, but also about immersing yourself in the culture and trying to speak with locals.
That's so true. Leah, and I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia have a rich cultural heritage that is reflected in their language and customs. And if you're interested in learning more about these cultures, I'd recommend checking out some of the local language schools and cultural centers.
That's a great idea, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that learning a new language can be a rewarding and enriching experience, even if it's challenging at times.
Absolutely. Leo, And I think it's also worth noting that both France and Micronesia offer a unique and enriching experience for language learners. And it's worth exploring these opportunities to learn more about the local culture and language.
Well, I think that's topic. Opportunities and ease of learning the local language in France and Micronesia. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast for more exciting topics and discussions about France and Micronesia. So, let's talk about safety and comfort for women travelers in France and Micronesia. I have to say, I've had some amazing experiences in France, but I've also heard some concerns from friends about safety. What's your take on it? Leo?
France, the land of love and, allegedly, harassment. But seriously, Mira, France has made significant strides in addressing street harassment and catcalling. They've even implemented a law that makes it a crime to catcall or harass women in public.
Wow, that's impressive. I didn't know that. I've had some close calls myself while walking around Paris, but I've never felt completely unsafe. What about Micronesia? Leo? I've heard it's a pretty laid-back and welcoming place.
Yeah, Micronesia is definitely a hidden gem. And I think it's because of its small size and close-knit communities that women feel safe and welcome. Plus, the locals are super friendly and accommodating, which makes a big difference.
That's great to hear. I've had friends who have traveled to Micronesia and they all raved about the hospitality. But I'm sure there are still some concerns about safety, especially for solo female travelers. Have you heard about any specific issues or challenges?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns is the lack of infrastructure and resources in some areas. For example, if you're traveling to a remote island, it can be tough to find reliable transportation or medical care. But overall, I think the Micronesian people are very resourceful and community-driven, which helps to mitigate some of these issues.
That makes sense. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that community support is essential for feeling safe and comfortable while traveling. Speaking of which, I'm curious to know, what do you think is the biggest misconception about safety and comfort for women travelers in Micronesia?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that Micronesia is too remote or too primitive for women to travel alone. But I think that's just not true. With a little planning and preparation, women can have a totally safe and amazing experience in Micronesia.
I agree. And I think that's an important message for our listeners. So let's talk about some of the specific measures that France and Micronesia have in place to support women's safety and comfort. In France, for example, there are many women's shelters and support services available for victims of harassment or violence.
That's right. And I think it's really impressive that France has made such a strong commitment to supporting women's safety and well-being. In Micronesia, there are also some amazing community-based initiatives that focus on women's empowerment and safety.
I'd love to hear more about those initiatives. Can you tell us a bit more about them? Leo?
Sure thing. For example, there's a program called Women's Empowerment Through Sports that focuses on promoting women's participation in sports and physical activity. And there's also a community-based initiative that provides support and resources for women who have experienced domestic violence.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to learn more about these initiatives. And I'm curious to know, what do you think is the key to creating a safe and welcoming environment for women travelers in Micronesia?
I think it's all about community engagement and support. When women feel supported and connected to their community, they're much more likely to feel safe and comfortable. And I think that's something that Micronesia has in spades.
I agree. And I think that's a great message for our listeners. So, let's wrap up by saying that while there are certainly challenges and concerns when it comes to safety and comfort for women travelers in France and Micronesia, there are also many resources and initiatives in place to support women's well-being and safety.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that both France and Micronesia are committed to creating a safe and welcoming environment for women travelers. And with a little planning and preparation, women can have a totally safe and amazing experience in both countries.
Well, that's all for now. Everyone, if you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more travel tips and advice.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes peeks into our travels. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Let's talk about the legal systems in France and Micronesia. I'm curious to know how these countries uphold individual rights and freedoms. In France, I've heard that the concept of liberté, idéalite, fraternite is deeply ingrained in the constitution.
Ah, yes. France's constitution is indeed a beautiful reflection of these values. But let's dive deeper. In Micronesia, the government is a federal constitutional republic, which is quite different from France's semi-presidential system.
That's an interesting point. Leo, I've also read that Micronesia has a strong focus on traditional laws and customs. How do these traditional laws interact with the modern legal system?
Well, in Micronesia, traditional laws are still an important part of the legal framework. However, they often conflict with the modern laws that were introduced by the colonial powers.
I see. So, it's a bit of a challenge for the government to balance these two systems. But, in France, I've heard that the concept of droit administrated is quite powerful. What's that all about?
Droit administrated is a fascinating topic. It refers to the body of law that governs the administration of the state. In France, this is a key part of the legal system, and it's often used to regulate the behavior of public officials.
That makes sense. In Micronesia, I've heard that the government is working to strengthen its legal system. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, that's right. The Micronesian government is working to modernize its legal system and make it more in line with international standards. This includes efforts to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and improve the rule of law.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that the legal systems in France and Micronesia are effective in upholding individual rights and freedoms?
Well, it's a complex issue, but I think that both countries have made significant progress in this area. However, there's still more work to be done to ensure that individual rights and freedoms are fully protected.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's also worth noting that the concept of individual rights and freedoms is not always the same in different cultures. In France, for example, the concept of droit à la vie privée is highly valued. What about in Micronesia?
In Micronesia, the concept of privacy is also important, but it's not always prioritized in the same way. Traditional laws and customs often place a greater emphasis on community and collective rights.
I see. So it's a bit of a challenge for the government to balance these competing interests. But, in France, I've heard that the concept of droit à l'information is also highly valued. What's that all about?
Droit à l'information is a key part of the French legal system. It refers to the right of citizens to access information about the government and its activities.
That makes sense. In Micronesia, I've heard that the government is working to improve access to information for its citizens. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, that's right. The Micronesian government is working to improve access to information and make it more transparent. This includes efforts to establish a Freedom of Information Act and to make government records more accessible.
I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me. The importance of access to information is crucial for any democratic society.
Absolutely. And, in both France and Micronesia, access to information is a fundamental right that is protected by law.
Let's dive into the world of spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in France and Micronesia. While France is famous for its luxurious spas and high-end wellness centers, Micronesia offers a unique blend of traditional and modern wellness practices.
Micronesia? The hidden gem of the Pacific. I'm curious to know. Mira, have you ever tried a traditional Micronesian spa treatment?
Actually, Leo, I have. It was an incredible experience. The traditional Micronesian spa treatment involves using natural ingredients like coconut oil and herbs to nourish and rejuvenate the skin.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the spa culture in France. What's the most luxurious spa experience you've had in France? Mira?
Ah, that's a tough one, Leo. But I would say it was a spa day at the famous Thermes Marquisanes in Paris. It was like a little slice of heaven on earth, with its stunning views of the Seine River and exquisite spa treatments.
Ooh, that sounds divine. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the spa culture in Micronesia. What's the most unique aspect of traditional Micronesian wellness practices? Mira?
Well, Leo, I think it's the emphasis on holistic wellness. Micronesian wellness practices focus on balancing the body, mind, and spirit, using techniques like meditation, yoga, and traditional medicine.
Ah, I see. And that's something that France also emphasizes, right? I mean, French people are known for their love of fine wine and good food, but they also prioritize wellness and self-care.
Exactly. Leo! And I think that's one of the things that makes France such a great destination for wellness enthusiasts. From the famous thermal baths of the Auvergne region to the luxurious spa resorts of the French Riviera, there's something for everyone.
Oh, I'm getting a little jealous. Mira, but seriously, I think it's great that both France and Micronesia prioritize wellness and self-care. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique wellness practices in Micronesia.
Absolutely. Leo? And I think it's worth noting on wellness practices are not just about physical health, but also about spiritual and emotional well-being.
Ah, I see. And that's something that France also emphasizes, right? I mean, the French concept of joie de vivre is all about living life to the fullest and finding joy in everyday moments.
Exactly. Leo! And I think that's something that we can all learn from, regardless of where we're from. Whether it's trying a new spot treatment, practicing yoga, or simply taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of nature. We can all prioritize our well-being and find joy in life.
Oh, I'm getting a little emotional. Mira, but seriously, I think it's great that we're having this conversation about wellness and self-care. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique wellness practices in Micronesia.
Leo, I think it's time to wrap up this conversation. But before we go, I want to ask our listeners, have you ever tried a traditional Micronesian spa treatment or visited a luxurious spa in France? Share your experiences with us in the comments below.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations about travel, culture, and wellness. Au revoir and aloha.
And remember, our listeners, to prioritize your own well-being and self-care, whether it's trying a new spa treatment, practicing yoga, or simply taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of nature.
Ooh, I'm getting a little carried away. Mira, but seriously, I think it's great that we're having this conversation about wellness and self-care.
Well, Leo, I think that's all for now. But before we go, I want to ask our listeners, what's your favorite spa treatment or wellness practice? Share with us in the comments below.
And don't forget to follow us on social media for more conversations about travel, culture, and wellness. Until next time, aloha and binte.
I'm so glad we're discussing the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in France and Micronesia. For me, spirituality is all about connection and community, and I'm to dive into what each country has to offer.
Ah, yes. And I'm curious to see how these two vastly different cultures approach faith and spirituality. I mean, France is all about grand cathedrals and ornate churches, while Micronesia has a more, let's say, laid-back approach to worship.
Well, I think that's what makes it so interesting. France has a rich history of Catholicism, and you can still see the grandeur of it in many of its churches. But Micronesia, on the other hand, has a more diverse religious landscape, with Christianity, Buddhism, and even some indigenous spiritual practices.
That's right. And I'm intrigued by the idea of Micronesia's KISM spirituality, which is all about connecting with nature and the community. It's like a spiritual practice that's deeply rooted in the culture.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful. In France, you have the grandeur of the Catholic Church, but in Micronesia, you have this more intimate, community-based approach to spirituality.
Yeah, and I'm sure our listeners are dying to know. What's the most beautiful cathedral in France?
Oh, Leo, you're such a tease. But seriously, I think the most beautiful cathedral in France is the one in Chartres. It's just stunning.
All right. I'll let you have that one. But in Micronesia, what's the most unique spiritual experience you've had?
Well, I once attended a traditional Micronesian ceremony, and it was just, well, the way the community came together. The music, the dancing, it was just so beautiful.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Maybe we can get some feedback from them in the comments section.
That's a great idea. And I'm curious. Leo, have you ever experienced any spiritual or cultural practices in Micronesia that really stood out to you?
Well, I have to admit, I once tried to participate in a traditional Micronesian dance. And, let's just say, I won't be winning any awards for my moves anytime soon.
Oh, Leo, you're such a goofball. But seriously, I think that's what makes it so special. The community in Micronesia is all about embracing each other's differences and coming together in a shared experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes both France and Micronesia so unique in their approach to spirituality and faith. It's not just about the grand cathedrals or the traditional practices, but about the community and the connection we feel with each other and with something greater than ourselves.
Well said, Leo. And I think that's what makes this podcast so special. We get to share these experiences and insights with our listeners and inspire them to explore their own spirituality and faith.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to share their own experiences and insights with us. So, let's hear from them. What do you think about the opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in France and Micronesia? Let us know in the comments section.
Dive into the social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in France and Micronesia. I'm curious. Leo, what's your take on France's approach to inclusivity?
Well, Mira, France has a reputation for being quite liberal. But when it comes to social equality, they're not as progressive as they claim. I mean, have you seen their treatment of immigrants and minorities?
That's a great point. Leo, France has indeed struggled with integration issues, but I think they're making efforts to improve. For instance, they've introduced policies to promote diversity in the workforce and education system.
Yeah, but those policies are often half-hearted and don't go far enough. I mean, what about the infamous burqa and I ban in some cities? That's not exactly a step towards inclusivity.
Yes, the burqa and I ban was a controversy, but it's also a reflection of the country's complex relationship with Islam and secularism. France is a country with a strong tradition of laicite, or secularism, and that can sometimes lead to conflicts with Muslim communities.
Exactly. And it's not just about the burqa and I ban. France has a history of racism and xenophobia, and it's not always easy to address. I mean, have you seen the protests against the Great Replacement theory?
Yes, I have. And it's disturbing to see. But, Leo, you have to acknowledge that France has also made progress in recent years. For example, they've implemented laws to protect LGBTQ individuals and women's rights.
I agree that there's been progress, but it's often patchy and uneven. And let's not forget that France is still a country with a strong sense of national identity, which can sometimes lead to exclusionary attitudes towards minorities.
That's a valid point, Leo. But I think it's also worth noting that France has a rich history of social activism and protest movements, which have pushed for greater inclusivity and equality.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes France such a fascinating country. It's a place where you can see both the best and worst of human nature on display.
Now, let's move on to Micronesia. I'm curious. Leo, what do you think about their approach to social equality and diversity?
Well, Mira, Micronesia is a bit of a dark horse in this regard. On the surface, it seems like a very egalitarian society, but scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find some pretty serious issues with social inequality.
That's a good point. Leo, Micronesia does have a history of social and economic inequality, particularly between the islands and the mainland. But I think they're also making efforts to address these issues.
Yeah, like what? I mean, I've seen some reports about their struggles with poverty and lack of access to healthcare, and it's just heartbreaking.
Exactly. But, Leo, you have to acknowledge that Micronesia is also a country with a strong sense of community and social cohesion. They have a unique cultural heritage that's all about sharing and mutual support.
I agree that community is a big part of Micronesian culture, but it's also a double-edged sword. I mean, when the community is tight-knit, it can be great. But when it's too rigid, it can be suffocating.
That's a valid point, Leo. But I think it's also worth noting that Micronesia has a rich history of cultural exchange and adaptation, which has helped them navigate the challenges of colonialism and globalization.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Micronesia such a fascinating country. It's a place where you can see the resilience of small island communities in the face of adversity.
I'm actually curious about what others think about this. Do you think France and Micronesia are doing enough to promote social equality and diversity?
Well, Nira, I think it's a complex issue. Both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's hard to generalize. But what do you think our listeners would say?
I think they'd say that it's a mixed bag. France has made progress in some areas, but it still has a long way to go. And Micronesia is working hard to address their social and economic inequalities.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this conversation so important. We need to keep having these kinds of discussions to push for greater inclusivity and equality in all our communities.
Now, let's talk about the role of education in promoting social equality and diversity. How do you think France and Micronesia approach education?
Well, Nira, France has a reputation for having some of the best schools in the world. But they also have a lot of work to do in terms of promoting diversity and inclusivity in education.
That's a great point. Leo, France has made efforts to introduce multiculturalism and diversity into their education system, but it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that Micronesia has a very different approach to education. They have a strong emphasis on community-based learning and cultural preservation.
That's a great point. Leo, Micronesia's approach to education is all about preserving their cultural heritage and promoting social cohesion.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Micronesia such a unique country. It's a place where you can see the power of community and cultural heritage in promoting social equality and diversity.
I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me. Education is key to promoting social equality and diversity, and both France and Micronesia are working to address these issues.
Absolutely, Mira. And I think that's what makes this conversation so important. We need to keep having these kinds of discussions to push for greater inclusivity and equality in all our communities.
Now let's talk about the role of technology in promoting social equality and diversity. How do you think France and Micronesia are using technology to address these issues?
Well, Mira, France has a lot of technology to offer, but I think they're not always using it effectively to promote social equality and diversity.
That's a good point. Leo, France has made efforts to introduce technology into their education system, but it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that Micronesia has a very different approach to technology. They're using it to preserve their cultural heritage and promote social cohesion.
That's a great point. Leo, Micronesia's approach to technology is all about preserving their cultural heritage and promoting social equality and diversity.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Micronesia such a unique country. It's a place where you can see the power of technology in promoting social equality and diversity.
I dive into taxation and its impact on long-term immigrants in France. As we all know, taxes can be a real challenge for expats. In France, they have a tax system that's a bit more complex than in some other countries. For example, there's a wealth tax, or impôt de solidarité sur la fortune, which can be a bit of a headache for those with significant assets.
Yes, I've heard of that one. It's like they're saying, hey, you've got a lot of money, so we're going to take a bit more from you. But seriously, it's a way for the government to redistribute wealth. I suppose. In Micronesia, they have a much simpler tax system, with a tax rate of 10% for individuals and 5% for businesses.
That's right. And in Micronesia, there's also a tax-free threshold. So individuals don't have to pay taxes on their first $10. Zero of income. But in France, they have a more progressive tax system, with higher tax rates for higher incomes. And let's not forget the infamous impôt sur la valeur ajoutée, or VAT, which is a value-added tax that applies to most goods and services.
Don't even get me started on VAT. It's like they're slapping an extra tax on everything. But I guess it's a necessary evil? Right. In Micronesia, they don't have a VAT. So, that's a definite plus for expats. But in France, they do have some tax credits and deductions that can help reduce the tax burden for long-term immigrants.
That's right. For example, there's a tax credit for foreign income, which can help reduce the tax liability for expats who earn income from abroad. And in Micronesia, they have a tax holiday for new businesses, which can be a great incentive for entrepreneurs.
Yes. Tax holidays can be a great way to attract new businesses and stimulate economic growth. But in France, they have a more complex system, with lots of rules and regulations to navigate. I'm sure our listeners who are living in France would agree that it's a bit of a challenge to understand the tax system.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners in Micronesia would agree that their tax system is much simpler and more straightforward. But, in all seriousness, both countries have their own unique approaches to taxation, and it's worth understanding the specifics of each system if you're planning to move there.
That's right. And it's not just about the tax rates and thresholds, but also about the overall culture and attitude towards taxes. In France, they have a strong tradition of taxation, and it's seen as a way to fund public services and social programs. In Micronesia, they have a more relaxed attitude towards taxes, and it's seen as a way to support economic growth and development.
Yes. That's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique benefits and drawbacks when it comes to taxation. For example, in France, they have a highly developed social safety net, with universal healthcare and education, but the taxes are higher to support it. In Micronesia, they have a more limited social safety net, but the taxes are lower.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approaches to retirement and social rights for long-term immigrants. For example, in France, they have a comprehensive pension system, with a wide range of options for expats, but the rules and regulations can be complex. In Micronesia, they have a more limited pension system, but it's still a great option for expats who want to retire in a tropical paradise.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique benefits and drawbacks when it comes to retirement and social rights. For example, in France, they have a highly developed pension system with a wide range of options for expats, but the rules and regulations can be complex. In Micronesia, they have a more limited pension system, but it's still a great option for expats who want to retire in a tropical paradise.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approaches to social rights and benefits for long-term immigrants. For example, in France, they have a comprehensive system of social benefits, including healthcare, education, and housing support. But the rules and regulations can be complex. In Micronesia, they have a more limited system of social benefits, but it's still a great option for expats who want to live in a tropical paradise.
Oh, yes. That's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique benefits and drawbacks when it comes to social rights and benefits. For example, in France, they have a highly developed system of social benefits, with a wide range of options for expats, but the rules and regulations can be complex. In Micronesia, they have a more limited system of social benefits, but it's still a great option for expats who want to live in a tropical paradise.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approaches to supporting long-term immigrants, including language support, cultural integration programs, and job training initiatives. For example, in France, they have a comprehensive system of language support with a wide range of options for expats, including language classes and cultural immersion programs. In Micronesia, they have a more limited system of language support, but it's still a great option for expats who want to learn the local language.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique benefits and drawbacks when it comes to supporting long-term immigrants. For example, in France, they have a highly developed system of language support, with a wide range of options for expats, including language classes and cultural immersion programs. In Micronesia, they have a more limited system of language support, but it's still a great option for expats who want to learn the local language.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approaches to supporting expats who are planning to retire in their countries. For example, in France, they have a comprehensive system of retirement benefits, including a state pension and a range of private pension options. In Micronesia, they have a more limited system of retirement benefits, but it's still a great option for expats who want to retire in a tropical paradise.
Yes, that's a great point. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique benefits and drawbacks when it comes to supporting expats who are planning to retire. For example, in France, they have a highly developed system of retirement benefits, with a wide range of options for expats, including a state pension and a range of. Bonjour. Me SMS. Today, we're diving into the world of France, where art, culture, and cuisine come together in perfect harmony. From the Eiffel Tower to the Louvre, the City of Light has a way of captivating our senses. But let's not forget about the lesser-known gems, like the charming villages and picturesque countryside. Who knows, maybe our listeners living in France will reveal some of their favorite hidden spots.
France, the land of love and romance. But, Mira, you're making it sound like a fairy tale. What about the more, shall we say, practical aspects of French culture? Like, have you seen the prices of wine in Paris? Ouch.
Yes, the wine prices. Well, Leo, you have to admit, it's worth every euro. And speaking of wine, have you tried a glass of Bordeaux from the Medoc region? It's simply divine. But I digress. Let's talk about the rate of meeting specific interests in France.
Okay. So, what makes France so special when it comes to meeting specific interests? Is it the art scene in Paris? The fashion in wine? Or maybe the food in? Well, everywhere?
That's a great question. I think it's a combination of all those things. But if I had to pinpoint one aspect, it would be the strong sense of community in France. From the local markets to the village festivals, there's always something going on that brings people together.
And, of course, there's the famous French phrase, joie de vivre, or the joy of living. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience that for themselves. So, Mira, what's the best way to experience the French way of life?
Oh, that's an easy one. Leo, you have to immerse yourself in the local culture. Attend a village festival. Try some street food, and learn a few French phrases. Trust me, the locals will appreciate the effort.
And, of course, don't forget to try some escargots and croissants. I'm sure our listeners are drooling just about it.
Yes, the French cuisine. It's definitely a highlight of the French experience. But let's not forget about the other country we're comparing. Micronesia.
Micronesia, the land of turquoise waters and coral reefs. I'm sure our listeners are itching to learn more about this Pacific island nation.
That's right, Leo. And speaking of meeting specific interests, Micronesia has a unique way of doing things. From the traditional dances to the local handicrafts, there's a rich cultural heritage waiting to be explored.
I'm intrigued. Mira, what makes Micronesia so special when it comes to meeting specific interests?
Well, I think it's the sense of community and tradition that's so strong in Micronesian culture. From the local markets to the village gatherings, there's always something going on that brings people together.
And, of course, there's the famous Micronesian phrase, Ai Kaimo, it's Kaimo, or the love of the sea. I'm sure our listeners would love to experience that for themselves.
That's right, Leah. And speaking of the sea, Micronesia has some of the most beautiful beaches and coral reefs in the world. If you're a beach lover or a snorkeler, Micronesia is definitely the place to be.
And of course, don't forget to try some of the local seafood. I'm sure our listeners are drooling just about it.
Yes, the seafood in Micronesia. It's definitely a highlight of the Micronesian experience. But not forget about the rate of meeting specific interests in both countries.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the key to meeting specific interests in both France and Micronesia?
Well, I think it's a combination of a strong sense of community and the unique cultural heritage of each country. From the local markets to the village festivals, there's always something going on that brings people together.
And, of course, there's the added bonus of trying some of the local cuisine. I'm sure our listeners are already planning their next culinary adventure.
Yes. The food in both countries is definitely a highlight. But let's not forget about the importance of community and tradition in meeting specific interests.
And, of course, don't forget to follow us on JetOff AI for more episodes like this. Hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop and be among the first to listen. We'd love for you to share your thoughts, comments, and critiques below. Reading and responding to them truly brightens our day.
Thanks for joining us. MES Amis. We'll be back soon with more. So until then, take care and see you in the next one. Warmest wishes from us.